In the dead of night, a bone-chilling scream echoes through the shadowy halls of Blackthornne Manor, a place cursed by whispers of a vengeful ghost. Why has the reclusive Lady Eleanor summoned Miss Marple, the unassuming yet razor-sharp sleuth, to unravel the manor's secrets? Are the ghostly footprints, vanishing heirlooms, and a near-fatal poisoning mere tricks, or is a sinister plot lurking beneath the curse? With every clue, Miss Marple edges closer to a hidden fortune and a dangerous conspiracy. Will she crack the case before the manor claims its next victim? Chapter 1. The Invitation to Blackthornne Manor. The late autumn sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting a golden haze across the tidy gardens and cobblestone paths of the village. Miss Jane Marple sat in her favourite armchair by the window of her cottage, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on a pale blue shawl. The air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves, and the faint chatter of sparrows filled the quiet afternoon. She was not expecting visitors, nor had she anticipated the letter that arrived with the morning post. Now resting on the table beside her teacup, the envelope was thick, cream-coloured, and bore a wax seal with an intricate, cresta thorny vine entwined around a blackthorn tree. The handwriting was elegant but urgent, the ink slightly smudged as though written in haste. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles, her curiosity piqued, and slit the envelope open with a silver letter opener. The letter was from Lady Eleanor Blackthornne, a name that stirred a faint memory from decades past, fleeting acquaintance from a charity gala in London, where Eleanor's sharp wit and poised demeanour had left an impression. "Dear Miss Marple," the letter began, "I write to you in a state of considerable distress, hoping your renowned discretion and insight might aid me in a matter most troubling. Blackthornne Manor, my family's home for generations, has fallen under a shadow. The villagers speak of a curse, and though I am not one for superstition, recent events have left me uneasy. Strange noises, fleeting shadows, and objects misplaced, in ways that defy explanation, have unsettled my household. My son, Henry, and daughter, Clara, are affected, and I fear for their safety. I implore you to visit us at Blackthornne Manor and lend your keen mind to unravelling this mystery. Your presence would be a comfort and, I hope, a solution. Yours sincerely, Eleanor Blackthornne." Miss Marple set the letter down, her fingers pausing mid-stitch. A curse, she thought, her lips curling into a faint, sceptical smile. She had heard such tales before. Village gossip often wove threads of superstition around old houses and older families. Yet Eleanor's tone suggested more than mere rumour. There was a genuine plea beneath the polished words. Miss Marple's mind, sharp as ever despite her advancing years, began to turn over possibilities. A manor, a family, and whispers of a curse. What secrets lay beneath the surface? She rose, her decision made, and began preparations for the journey. 2 days later, Miss Marple found herself in a rattling taxi, winding through the misty lanes of the Devon countryside. The driver, a chatty man with a penchant for local lore, regaled her with tales of Blackthornne Manor. "They say it's cursed, miss," he said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Been that way since old Margaret Blackthorne drowned in the lake, nigh on a century ago. Folks see her ghost, they do, wandering the grounds at night, all wet and weeping." Miss Marple nodded politely, her eyes fixed on the rolling hills. Outside, "How fascinating," she murmured, though her mind was already sifting through the driver's words, separating fact from embellishment. Ghost stories were often the villagers' way of explaining the unexplainable deaths, scandals, or simple human misdeeds. She adjusted her hat, a sensible navy affair with a single feather, and prepared herself for what lay ahead. The taxi crested a hill, and Blackthornne Manor came into view. It was a sprawling, Gothic edifice of grey stone, its turrets piercing the low clouds like jagged teeth. Ivy clung to its walls, and the windows glinted darkly as though guarding secrets. The estate was surrounded by dense woods, their branches skeletal in the autumn chill, and a Rottian gate creaked as the driver slowed. Miss Marple noted the overgrown gardens, the untended rose bushes, and the faint air of neglect that hung over the place. It was beautiful, in a melancholic way, but undeniably eerie. The gate swung open, and a figure emerged from the shadows, a man in a dark suit, his posture rigid. "That'll be Mr. Grayson, the butler," the driver muttered. "Odd sort, keeps to himself." Miss Marple thanked the driver, tipped him generously, and stepped out, her small suitcase in hand. Mr. Grayson approached, his face a mask of polite neutrality, though his eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Miss Marple, I presume," he said, his voice smooth but clipped. "Lady Eleanor awaits you. Please follow me." The manor's interior was as imposing as its exterior. The entrance hall was vast, with a soaring ceiling adorned with faded frescoes of cherubs and vines. A grand staircase spiraled upward, its banister carved with thorny motifs that echoed the family crest. The air smelled of old wood and wax polish, tinged with something mustier like damp stone. Miss Marple's sharp eyes took in every detail: threadbare rug, the chipped vase on a side table, the faint scuff marks on the floorboards. A house, she knew, could tell as many stories as its inhabitants. Lady Eleanor Blackthornne descended the staircase, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her silk dress rustling softly. She was in her late 60s, Miss Marple estimated, but carried herself with the grace of a younger woman, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of anxiety. "Miss Marple," she said warmly, extending a hand, "I cannot thank you enough for coming. I fear we are at our wits' end." "My dear Lady Eleanor," Miss Marple replied, her voice gentle but firm, "I am delighted to assist, though I suspect the truth is less fantastical than the villagers believe." Eleanor's smile was strained. "I hope you're right. Come, let me introduce you to the family." They moved to the drawing room, a cavernous space with heavy velvet curtains and a roaring fire that did little to dispel the chill. Two young people stood as they entered, a man in his 30s, pale and brooding, and a young woman with fiery auburn hair and a defiant spark in her eyes. "My son, Henry," Eleanor said, gesturing to the man, "and my daughter, Clara." Henry offered a curt nod, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice low, almost reluctant. Clara, in contrast, stepped forward, her handshake firm. "I've heard of your reputation," she said, a hint of challenge in her tone. "I hope you can make sense of this nonsense. I'm tired of jumping at shadows." Miss Marple smiled, noting Clara's spirit and Henry's reticence. "I shall do my best," she said simply, settling into a backed chair. Mr. Grayson lingered by the door, his presence almost ghostly, and Miss Marple made a mental note of his watchful demeanour over tea. Eleanor recounted the strange events: footsteps in empty corridors, books falling from shelves, and a mirror in the library that cracked without cause. "The villagers say it's Margaret's curse," she said, her voice dropping. "My grand-aunt drowned in the lake in 1847. They claim she haunts us." "Seeking revenge for some betrayal," Clara snorted. "It's rubbish. Someone's playing tricks and I'd wager it's to scare us into selling the manor. We've had offers, you know, shady types from London sniffing around. Henry shot his sister a sharp look. Clara, don't be absurd. No one's selling. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind cataloguing their reactions. Clara's boldness suggested either innocence or a clever facade. Henry's defensiveness hinted at something unspoken. Eleanor, meanwhile, seemed genuinely frightened, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. As for Mr. Grayson, he remained silent, but his eyes never left the room. Dinner was a quiet affair, served in a dining room lit by a chandelier that flickered ominously. The meal roast pheasant, potatoes, and a rather watery soup was adequate but uninspired, suggesting the household's resources were strained. Conversation was stilted. Henry spoke little. Clara deflected questions with witty barbs, and Eleanor tried valiantly to keep the mood light. Miss Marple observed, her gentle questions probing the family's history, their recent visitors, and the manor's finances. Each answer added a piece to the puzzle, though none fit together yet. After dinner, Miss Marple retired to her room, a cosy chamber with a four-poster bed and a window overlooking the dark woods. She sat at a small desk, jotting notes in her neat, precise handwriting. Eleanor, fearful, protective. Henry, withdrawn, possibly hiding something. Clara defiant, perhaps too quick to dismiss the curse. Grayson secretive, observant. Manor neglected, financial strain. Curse likely a cover for human mischief. She paused, tapping her pencil against her lips. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that felt like a held breath. As the clock struck midnight, the silence shattered. A scream tore through the manor, high and piercing, followed by a thud that seemed to come from below. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her movements were calm and deliberate. She slipped on her dressing gown, tucked her notebook into her pocket, and stepped into the corridor. The scream had come from the direction of the library, and as she descended the staircase, she heard hurried footsteps and hushed voices in the library. She found Eleanor, pale and trembling, clutching a candelabrum. Clara stood by the window, her face flushed with anger, while Henry hovered near the door, his eyes darting nervously. Mr. Grayson was already there, lighting a lamp with steady hands. "What happened?" Miss Marple asked, her voice calm but commanding. "It was a scream," Eleanor stammered. "From here, I think. I ran down, but there's no one." Clara crossed her arms. "It's another trick. Someone's trying to frighten us." Miss Marple's eyes scanned the room. The library was a treasure trove of old books, their spines cracked and gilded, but the air held a faint dampness, as though a window had been left open. Her gaze fell on the rug near the fireplace, where a faint smear of mud marked the pattern. She knelt, her fingers brushing the fibers. "Wet," she murmured, glancing at the window, which was firmly shut. "Curious, curious," Henry snapped, his voice sharp. "It's just dirt. Probably tracked in from the garden." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but at midnight, in a locked room." She rose, her mind racing. The scream, the mud, the tense faces around Hurt was a tableau of secrets, each person a potential player in a drama yet to unfold. She felt a familiar thrill, the quiet satisfaction of a mystery taking shape. "Lady Eleanor," she said gently, "I suggest we all return to bed. I shall look into this further tomorrow. No need to alarm ourselves unduly." Eleanor nodded, her relief palpable, and the group dispersed, though Clara cast a lingering glance at Miss Marple, as if sizing her up. Mr. Grayson escorted Miss Marple to her room, his silence heavier than before. As she closed the door, she heard the faint creak of a floorboard outside. But when she opened it again, the corridor was empty. Back at her desk, Miss Marple added to her notes, "Scream at midnight female. Mud in library, no obvious source. Family tense, Grayson evasive. Someone is setting a stage, but for what purpose?" She closed her notebook, her mind alight with possibilities. Blackthornne Manor was no mere haunted house. It was a chessboard, and someone was making their opening move as she slipped into bed. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows like a restless spirit. Miss Marple smiled to herself. "A curse, indeed," she murmured, pulling the blankets close. "We shall see." Chapter 2. The Ghostly Footprints. The scream still reverberated in Miss Marple's ears as she stood in the dimly lit hallway of Blackthornne Manor, her shawl drawn tightly around her shoulders. The clock had just struck midnight, and the house, with its creaking timbers and shadowed corners, seemed to hold its breath. The scream had been sharp, almost inhuman, slicing through the silence like a shard of glass. It had come from somewhere deep within the manor, perhaps the West Wing, where the library and the family's private quarters lay. Miss Marple's keen eyes darted toward the staircase, her mind already sifting through possibilities. A prank, a genuine cry of terror, or something more calculated. She moved swiftly for a woman of her years, her soft-soled slippers making no sound on the polished oak floor. The rest of the household was stirring. Now doors creaked open and muffled voices drifted from upstairs. Lady Eleanor Blackthornne appeared at the top of the staircase, her face pale as moonlight, her silk dressing gown clutched at her throat. "Miss Marple, did you hear it?" Eleanor's voice trembled, her eyes wide with fear. "It was her, wasn't it? The drowned one. She's come back." Miss Marple offered a reassuring smile, though her mind was far from settled. "Let's not jump to conclusions, Lady Eleanor. A scream can have many causes, and I intend to find the right one. Shall we investigate?" Eleanor hesitated, then nodded, her fingers twisting the lace at her cuffs. Clara, her daughter, appeared behind her, her auburn hair loose and her expression a mix of curiosity and defiance. "I'm coming too," she declared, pulling a shawl over her nightdress. Henry, Eleanor's son, lingered at the edge of the landing, his face half hidden in shadow, his eyes darting nervously. Mr. Grayson, the butler, materialized silently at the foot of the stairs, his impeccable black suit somehow unruffled despite the hour. "Madame, I've checked the main doors." "All are secure," Grayson said, his voice smooth, but with an undercurrent Miss Marple couldn't quite place. "The sound came from the library, I believe." "Then that's where we'll start," Miss Marple said briskly, leading the way. Her calm demeanor belied the quickening of her pulse. She had always found that the truth, like a good skein of wool, unraveled best when you followed the threads methodically. The library was a cavernous room, its walls lined with towering bookshelves that stretched into the gloom. A single candelabrum flickered on a mahogany table, casting long shadows that danced across the portraits of stern Blackthornne ancestors. The air was heavy with the scent of old leather and wax, and a faint chill lingered, as if the room had not been warmed in years. Miss Marple's gaze swept the space, noting the heavy velvet curtains, the locked windows, and the ornate fireplace. Its hearth, cold and dark. "There," Clara said, pointing to the floor near the window. "Look." In the faint glow of the candles, wet footprints glistened on the polished floorboards. They began at the window, which was latched from the inside, and trailed across the room toward a side door that led to the garden. The prints were small, delicate, as if made by a woman's bare feet, and they shimmered with moisture, as though someone had walked through a puddle moments before. Miss Marple knelt, her fingers hovering just above the prints, careful not to disturb them. The water was clear, with no trace of mud or debris, and the prints were oddly uniform, as if deliberately placed. "Curious," she murmured. "The window is locked, and the door to the garden is bolted from within. Yet these prints suggest someone entered or left." Eleanor clutched her daughter's arm. "It's her, Margaret Blackthornne, the drowned one. They say she walks the manor at night, seeking revenge for her betrayal." Miss Marple straightened, her expression thoughtful. "I've heard the tale, Lady Eleanor. Your ancestor, Margaret, who drowned in the lake a century ago after a scandal. But ghosts, in my experience, rarely leave such tangible traces. Let's see where these footprints lead." The group followed the trail to the side door, which opened onto a narrow stone path winding through the manor's overgrown garden. The night was damp, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and decaying roses. The footprints continued outside, faint but visible on the flagstones, before vanishing abruptly at the edge of a gravel path. Miss Marple scanned the surroundings, a tangle of ivy, a crumbling fountain, and the dark silhouette of the lake in the distance, its surface like polished obsidian under the moon. "Nothing," Henry muttered, his voice tight. "They just stop." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her tone mild but her eyes sharp, as if our visitor vanished into thin air. Or perhaps they were clever enough to obscure their tracks. Clara frowned, her hands on her hips. "You don't believe in the ghost, do you, Miss Marple? It's nonsense, isn't it?" Miss Marple's lips twitched into a smile. "I believe in what I can see, touch, and reason, my dear. And these footprints, ghostly or not, are telling us something. Let's return to the library. I'd like a closer look." Back inside, Miss Marple examined the room with meticulous care. She ran her fingers along the window frame, noting the absence of forced entry. She tapped the floorboards, listening for hollow spots, and paused at the fireplace, where a faint draught stirred the air. Her gaze fell on a bookshelf near the window, its lower shelves slightly askew, as if someone had brushed against them in haste. She knelt again, this time noticing a faint smudge of wax on the floor, as if a candle had dripped. "Mr. Grayson," she said, turning to the butler, who stood rigidly by the door, "do you often clean this room at night?" "No, madam," he replied, his face impassive. "The library is locked after dinner, as per Lady Eleanor's instructions." "And yet someone was here," Miss Marple said, her tone conversational but her eyes piercing. "Someone who left wet footprints and perhaps moved this shelf. Have you noticed anything unusual in the household lately? Visitors, perhaps, or items out of place?" Grayson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Nothing out of the ordinary, Miss Marple. The manor is old, and old houses have their quirks." "Quite so," she said, smiling faintly. "But quirks don't scream, nor do they leave footprints." Eleanor shivered. "What do you think it means, Miss Marple? Is someone trying to frighten us?" "Someone," Miss Marple said, "is certainly trying to make a point. Whether it's a ghost or a living soul, I intend to find out. Now, let's see if this bookshelf has any secrets." She pressed gently against the shelf, feeling for resistance. With a soft click, a panel slid open, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside were a handful of yellowed letters tied with a faded ribbon. Miss Marple carefully lifted them, her fingers brushing against the brittle paper. The topmost letter bore a wax seal, cracked but intact, with the Blackthornne crest a raven clutching a thorn. Family correspondence, she mused aloud, glancing at Eleanor. May I? Eleanor nodded, her face a mixture of dread and curiosity. Those must be ancient. I've never seen them before. Miss Marple opened the first letter, her eyes scanning the faded ink. It was dated 1823, written in a hurried, feminine hand. The words were cryptic, speaking of a betrayal and a promise broken by blood. The signature was Margaret Blackthornne. Another letter mentioned a hidden legacy and a warning to beware the raven shadow. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. These were no ordinary letters, they hinted at a scandal buried deep in the family's past, one that might explain the so-called curse. These are intriguing, she said, tucking the letters into her shawl. I'll study them further. For now, I suggest we all return to bed. There's nothing more to be done tonight, and I suspect our ghost prefers the dark. The household dispersed reluctantly, their faces etched with unease. Miss Marple lingered in the library, her candle casting a soft glow. She retraced the footprints, noting their deliberate placement. They were too perfect, too staged, as if meant to be found. She crouched by the window again, her fingers brushing the sill. A faint scent lingered brine, sharp and unmistakable, like seawater. Yet the lake was fresh water, and the nearest coast was miles away. Curiouser and curiouser, she murmured, her mind racing. The scream, the footprints, the letters, all pieces of a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. Someone in Blackthornne Manor was playing a clever game, and Miss Marple was determined to outwit them. As she made her way back to her room, the manor seemed to watch her, its shadows shifting like whispers. She passed a portrait of Margaret Blackthornne, her painted eyes following Miss Marple's every step. The woman in the painting was young, with a defiant gaze and a locket at her throat, a locket that looked disturbingly familiar. Miss Marple paused, her memory snagging on a detail from the letters, a mention of a key to the family's secrets. She smiled to herself, a quiet satisfaction settling in her chest. The night's events had given her a thread to pull, and she intended to unravel it. The ghostly footprints were no supernatural omen, they were a clue, deliberately left to mislead or to taunt. Whoever had made them was still in the manor, and Miss Marple was already forming a mental list of suspects. Grayson's guarded demeanour, Henry's nervous glances, Clara's fierce curiosity, each held a piece of the truth as she slipped into her room and locked the door. Miss Marple sat at the small writing desk, spreading the letters before her. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows that seemed to dance with secrets. She opened her notebook, her pen scratching softly as she jotted down her observations. Footprints, deliberate, possibly staged. Seawater scent unexplained. Letters suggest scandal, hidden legacy. Motive unclear. Suspects, Grayson evasive, Henry nervous, Clara curious but open. Investigate library further, check garden for additional traces. She leaned back, her eyes narrowing. The scream had been the opening move in a game of deception, and the footprints were a challenge. Miss Marple loved a challenge. She closed her notebook, her mind already spinning with possibilities. Tomorrow she would search the garden at dawn, when the light was soft and revealing. She would speak to the staff, probe their stories, and watch for the smallest slip. For now, though, she was content. The first clues were in hand, and the truth, like a shy creature, was beginning to emerge from the shadows. Miss Marple blew out the candle and settled into bed, the Manor's silence wrapping around her like a cloak. She had no doubt the ghost would strike again, but she would be ready. The next morning, Miss Marple rose with the first light, her movements quiet but purposeful. The Manor was still, save for the distant clatter of pots from the kitchen. She slipped into a sensible tweed skirt and cardigan, her eyes bright with anticipation. The garden awaited, and with it, perhaps, another piece of the puzzle. She stepped outside, the air crisp and heavy with dew. The flagstone path was damp, but the footprints from the night before had faded, washed away by the morning mist. Miss Marple followed the path to where the prints had vanished, her gaze scanning the gravel for disturbances. Near the fountain, she noticed a patch of earth slightly churned, as if someone had stepped off the path. Kneeling, she found a single drop of wax, hardened in the soil, matching the smudge in the library. Clever, she murmured, but not clever enough. She straightened, her eyes drifting to the lake. Its surface was calm, reflecting the grey sky, but something about it tugged at her. The seawater scent lingered in her memory, an anomaly she couldn't yet place. She made a mental note to ask about the Manor's water sources, perhaps a well or an underground spring. As she turned back toward the Manor, a figure emerged from the greenhouse, a wiry man in rough clothing, his hands stained with soil. The gardener, Tom, she presumed. He froze when he saw her, his weathered face tightening. "Good morning," Miss Marple called, her tone warm but probing. "You must be Tom. I'm Jane Marple, a guest here. I wonder if you've noticed anything unusual in the garden lately. Footprints, perhaps, or strangers about." Tom's eyes narrowed, but he tipped his cap. "Ain't seen nothing strange, miss, just tending the roses, as always." Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. "Of course. But if you do recall anything, even the smallest detail, I'd be grateful to hear it. Old houses like this have so many stories, don't they?" Tom grunted, turning back to the greenhouse. Miss Marple watched him go, noting the stiffness in his shoulders. He knew something. She was sure of it. The garden, the library, the letters, all were threads in the same tapestry, and she was beginning to see its pattern. She returned to the Manor, her mind buzzing with questions. Who had screamed, and why? Why stage the footprints, and what was the significance of the seawater scent? The letters hinted at a scandal, but was it tied to the present, or was someone exploiting the past for their own ends? And what role did the household play? Lenore's fear, Henry's secrecy, Clara's boldness, Grayson's reserve, and now Tom's reticence. Miss Marple paused in the hallway, her hand resting on the banister. The Manor was a chessboard, and she was a player in a game where the pieces moved in shadows. But she was no stranger to shadows. She would watch, listen, and wait. The truth, she knew, always revealed itself to those who looked closely enough as she climbed the stairs. A faint creak echoed from the west wing, too soft to be accidental. Miss Marple's lips curved into a smile. The game was on, and she was ready for the next move. Chapter 3. The vanishing heirloom. The morning sun barely pierced the heavy drapes of Blackthornne Manor, casting long, wavering shadows across the breakfast room. Miss Marple sat at the polished mahogany table, her sharp eyes flitting between the occupants. Lady Eleanor Blackthornne, poised yet pale, stirring her tea with a faint clink. Her son Henry, slouched and sullen, pushing eggs around his plate. Clara, vibrant but restless, her gaze darting to the window. And Mr. Grayson, the the butler, standing rigidly by the sideboard, his face a mask of practiced neutrality. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the kind that follows a scream in the night, unexplained, unresolved, and simmering. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind already turning over the previous night's discovery. Wet footprints trailing from the locked library to the garden, hinting at something more tangible than village tales of curses. She had slept little, her thoughts weaving a tapestry of possibilities. The manor, with its creaking floors and shadowed corners, seemed to whisper secrets, and she was determined to listen. Clara broke the silence, her voice sharp with distress. "Mother, it's gone. The sapphire brooch grandmother Margaret's heirloom, it's vanished from my jewelry box." She pushed back her chair, her auburn curls bouncing as she stood. "I checked this morning, and it's simply not there." Teaspoon clattered against her saucer. "Clara, are you certain? That brooch has been in our family for generations. It's priceless not just in value, but in history." Her voice trembled, betraying a crack in her aristocratic composure. "You must have misplaced it." "I didn't misplace it." Clara's eyes flashed. "I wore it last week, and I put it back myself. Someone took it." Henry snorted, barely looking up. "Probably one of the maids. You know how they covet shiny things." Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile, unnoticed by the others. Henry's quick deflection was telling a touch too eager, perhaps. She set her teacup down gently. "Might I suggest, Lady Eleanor, that we examine Clara's room? A thorough search could put this matter to rest. And, of course, it would be prudent to question the staff." Eleanor nodded, her hands clasped tightly. "Yes, Miss Marple, please. I trust your judgment. This curse nonsense is bad enough without losing family treasures." Grayson stepped forward, his voice smooth as polished stone. "I shall summon the staff, my lady. They'll cooperate fully." His dark eyes met Miss Marple's for a fleeting moment, and she noted a flicker of something wariness, perhaps, before he turned away. Clara's bedroom was a study in contrasts. Delicate lace curtains softened the heavy oak furniture, and a vibrant watercolor of the manor's gardens hung above a cluttered vanity. Miss Marple's gaze swept the room, lingering on the jewelry box, a lacquered rosewood case with a brass lock, now slightly ajar. Clara stood by, wringing her hands, while Eleanor hovered near the door, her face etched with worry. "It was here," Clara insisted, pointing to the box. "I always keep it locked, but this morning the catch was loose." Miss Marple knelt, her fingers brushing the box's smooth surface. The lock was intact, but the mechanism felt slack, as if tampered with. "Curious," she murmured. "A skilled hand could open this without a key, given time." She straightened, her eyes scanning the room. "Clara, dear, did you notice anything unusual last night? Any sounds, perhaps, after the scream?" Clara frowned, her brow furrowing. I couldn't sleep after that awful noise. I thought I heard footsteps, soft ones, near my door, but when I looked, no one was there." Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. "And you, Lady Eleanor, did you hear anything?" Eleanor shook her head. "I took a sleeping draught. The scream woke me, but I heard nothing after. I assumed it was just the wind." "The wind," Miss Marple thought, "does not leave footprints." She moved to the fireplace, its hearth cold and swept clean. Her fingers traced the mantel, pausing at a faint scuff mark on the stone, barely noticeable, but fresh. She crouched, peering into the fireplace's recess. A small, irregular patch of soot was disturbed, as if something had been pressed against it. "Interesting," she said softly. "Clara, do you use this fireplace often?" "Not in summer," Clara replied, puzzled. "Why?" Miss Marple didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tapped the stone surround, listening for a hollow sound. A faint echo rewarded her efforts. With a gentle push, a small panel shifted, revealing a narrow compartment, save for a faint dusting of ash. "A hiding place," she said, her voice calm but laced with satisfaction. "Someone has been here recently," Eleanor gasped. "A secret compartment in Clara's room. It's not uncommon in old houses," Miss Marple said, brushing soot from her fingers. "Manors like this are riddled with such nooks. The question is, what was hidden here and why?" The staff assembled in the drawing room. 2 maids, a cook, and Grayson, all standing stiffly under Miss Marple's scrutiny. The maids, young and nervous, fidgeted as they denied touching the brooch. The cook, a stout woman with flour-dusted hands, swore she hadn't left the kitchen since dawn. Grayson, however, was a study in composure. His answers precise but curiously vague. "I locked the manor last night, as always," he said, his voice steady. "No one could have entered without my knowledge. And yet," Miss Marple said, her tone mild, a scream echoed through the house, and a brooch has vanished. "Tell me, Mr. Grayson, do you ever inspect the family's rooms? For ... maintenance, perhaps?" Grayson's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Occasionally, ma'am, to ensure everything is in order. But I've no business with Miss Clara's." "Jewelry," Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling. "Of course. And the fireplace in her room. Do you clean it yourself?" "The maids handled that," he said quickly. Too quickly, Miss Marple noted. She let the silence linger, watching his fingers twitch against his cuff. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson," she said at last. "That will be all for now." As the staff dispersed, Miss Marple caught Clara's eye. "Let's take a walk in the garden. My dear, fresh air sharpens the mind." The gardens of Blackthornne Manor were a labyrinth of rose bushes and gravel paths, their beauty tinged with neglect. Weeds crept between stones, and the fountain at the centre was dry, its marble cherubs stained with moss. Clara led the way, her steps quick and agitated. "I can't believe someone would steal from us," she said, kicking a pebble. "That brooch was Grandmother Margaret's pride. She always said it held the family's luck." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning the ground. "Luck is a curious thing, Clara. Sometimes it's less about fate and more about intention. Tell me, does anyone else know the value of that brooch?" "Everyone in the family does," Clara said. "And the staff, I suppose. Mother's always showing it off at dinners." She paused, her voice dropping. "Do you think it's tied to the curse? The villagers say the brooch is cursed, to that. It brings misfortune to whoever wears it." Miss Marple chuckled softly. "Villagers love their stories, don't they? But I suspect this misfortune is rather more ... human in origin." Her gaze settled on a patch of disturbed earth near a yew hedge, half hidden by shadows. She knelt, her gloved fingers brushing the soil. Something glinted beneath a leaf flash of blue. "Clara, look here," she said, carefully lifting the object. It was the sapphire brooch, its intricate silver setting caked with mud, but undamaged. Clara gasped, reaching for it, but Miss Marple held it up to the light, turning it thoughtfully. "It's been out here all night," she said. "Odd, don't you think? A thief who steals a priceless heirloom only to discard it in the garden. Clara's eyes widened. Why would someone do that? To mislead us, perhaps, Miss Marple said, her voice soft but firm. To make us think the theft was the point, when it's merely a distraction. She slipped the brooch into her pocket, her mind racing. The scuff marks, the secret compartment, the muddy brooch, all pointed to a deliberate act, not a simple theft. Someone wanted the family's attention diverted, but from what? Back in the manor, Miss Marple retreated to the library, the brooch safely tucked away. The room was a cavern of oak shelves and leather-bound volumes, its air heavy with the scent of old paper. She sat at a writing desk, her notebook open, jotting down observations, footprints, secret compartment, Grayson's evasion, brooch in, garden. Each clue was a thread, and she was determined to weave them together. Eleanor joined her, her face drawn. You found it, then? Oh, Miss Marple, I'm so relieved. But who would do such a thing? Someone with a purpose, Miss Marple said, her pen pausing. The brooch wasn't stolen for its value, Lady Eleanor. It was meant to stir fear, to keep us looking in the wrong direction. Tell me, has anything else unusual happened recently? Beyond the scream and the footprints? Eleanor hesitated, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. Well, there's been talk of selling the manor. Henry's been pressing me, saying we can't afford to keep it. But I can't bear to let it go. It's our legacy. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. And does Mr. Grayson know of these plans? He handles the accounts, Eleanor admitted. He's been ... insistent that we're in financial trouble. But I trust him. He's been with us for years. Trust is a fine thing, Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing. But it's wise to verify. Might I see the account books? Eleanor nodded, summoning Grayson. He arrived with a leather ledger, his expression unreadable. Everything is in order, ma'am, he said, placing it before her. Miss Marple opened the ledger, her eyes scanning columns of figures. The numbers were neat, but something caught her attention: a series of small, irregular withdrawals, labelled only as miscellaneous. They were modest but frequent, draining the estate's reserves over months. She closed the book, her face serene but her mind alight. Thank you, Mr. Grayson, she said. Most illuminating. That evening, Miss Marple sat by her window, the brooch on the table before her. The manor was quiet, but the silence felt charged, like the calm before a storm. She had unravelled the first layer of the mystery. The brooch's theft was a ruse, designed to distract from something larger. The scuff marks, the hidden compartment, Grayson's guarded demeanour all pointed to a scheme within the manor's walls. But what was the true prize? And who was pulling the strings? She recalled a similar case in St. Mary Mead, where a stolen locket had masked a deeper plot to discredit a family. People, she mused, were predictable in their greed and fear. Yet Blackthornne Manor held secrets older and darker than she had anticipated. The curse, the footprints, the brooch, they were pieces of a puzzle, and she was close to seeing the pattern. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Clara slipped inside, her face pale. Miss Marple, I found something in the garden, near where you found the brooch. It was half buried, like someone dropped it in a hurry. She held out a small, tarnished key, its surface etched with a faint rose motif. Miss Marple took it, her fingers tracing the design. Well, well, she said, her voice tinged with satisfaction. A key to what, I wonder? You've done well, Clara. Keep this between us for now." As Clara left, Miss Marple leaned back, the key glinting in her hand. The thief was closer than anyone suspected, and she was pleased, very pleased indeed, to have unravelled a deliberate misdirection. The game was afoot, and Miss Marple was ready to play. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Attic. The air in Blackthornne Manor hung heavy with the scent of old wood and wax polish. But to Miss Jane Marple, it carried something else, a faint undercurrent of unease, like a melody played just out of tune. The scream from the first night still lingered in her mind, sharp and unsettling, though she had tucked it away like a folded letter in the back of her thoughts. She sat by the window in her guest room, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, the soft woolen shawl growing steadily under her deft fingers. Her eyes, however, were not on the yarn but on the sprawling gardens below, where the morning mist clung to the hedges like a reluctant guest. Clara Blackthorne had burst into the breakfast room earlier, her cheeks flushed and her voice tight with excitement. "Miss Marple, did you hear it last night? Those noises from the attic, like footsteps or something heavier dragging, perhaps. I swear it wasn't the wind." Her green eyes had sparkled with a mix of fear and curiosity, and Miss Marple had noted the way Clara's hands fidgeted with her napkin, betraying a restlessness that went beyond mere gossip. Now, as the manor settled into the quiet of late morning, Miss Marple set her knitting aside and rose, smoothing her tweed skirt. Clara's words had piqued her interest, not because of the noises themselves — vault houses were notorious for their creaks and groans — but because of the girl's insistence. There was a sincerity in Clara's agitation that suggested more than childish imagination. Besides, Miss Marple had learned long ago that even the most fanciful tales often held a kernel of truth. Like a seed buried in rich soil, she found Clara in the drawing room, leafing through a worn copy of Wuthering Heights, though her eyes kept darting to the window. "Miss Marple," Clara exclaimed, snapping the book shut, "I was hoping you'd come. Will you go to the attic with me? I can't bear to go alone, but I must know what's up there." Miss Marple smiled, her expression gentle but her mind already turning like the gears of a well-oiled clock. "Of course, my dear, a little exploration might do us both good. Old houses have a way of keeping secrets, don't they?" Clara nodded eagerly, her auburn curls bouncing. "It's not just the noises. There's something wrong about the attic. Mother says it's just storage, but Mr. Grayson avoids it, and Henry, well, he told me never to go up there. Naturally, that makes me want to go all the more." Miss Marple's lips twitched with amusement. Clara's defiance reminded her of her own niece, always chasing the forbidden with a spark in her eye. "Lead the way, then," she said, adjusting her shawl. "But let's be discreet. No need to stir the household just yet." The staircase to the attic was tucked behind a faded tapestry in the east wing, its narrow steps spiralling upward like a secret kept too long. Clara carried a brass candelabrum, its flickering flames casting long shadows that danced across the stone walls. Miss Marple followed, her steps light but deliberate, her senses alert to every creak and sigh of the old manor. The air grew colder as they ascended, and a faint musty smell greeted them as Clara pushed open the attic door. The attic was vast, its slanted ceiling supported by thick oak beams that seemed to groan under the weight of time. Dust motes floated, in the dim light filtering through a single grimy window, and the floor was littered with crates, trunks, and shrouded furniture that loomed like silent sentinels. Clara held the candelabrum higher, her breath catching as she scanned the shadows. "It's like stepping into a forgotten world," she whispered, Miss Marple's eyes roamed the space, taking in the details: a cracked mirror propped against a wall, a pile of moth-eaten curtains, and a row of portraits stacked haphazardly, their painted faces obscured by dust. A world with stories to tell, she murmured, stepping forward. Her foot nudged something softer, velvet pouch, half hidden beneath a broken chair. She bent to retrieve it, but Clara's sudden gasp stopped her. There, Clara pointed, to a corner where the shadows seemed to shift, as if something or someone had moved just out of sight. The candelabrum trembled in her hands, casting wild flickers across the room. Miss Marple placed a calming hand on Clara's arm. "Steady, my dear. Shadows play tricks, especially in a place like this. Let's have a closer look." Her tone was soothing, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the corner for any sign of movement. She stepped forward, her sensible shoes tapping softly on the wooden floor, and peered into the gloom. Nothing, just a pile of old rugs and a chipped porcelain vase. Yet the air felt heavier, as if the attic itself were holding its breath. "Explore a bit more," Miss Marple suggested, her voice calm but firm. "If there's something to find, we'll find it together." Clara nodded, though her eyes were wide with apprehension. They moved deeper into the attic, weaving between crates and cobwebs. Miss Marple's fingers brushed against a heavy oak trunk, its brass lock glinting in the candlelight. "This looks promising," she said, kneeling to examine it. The lock was old but sturdy, its keyhole scratched as if someone had tried to force it open. "Clara, have you ever seen a key for this?" Clara shook her head. "No, but Henry used to play up here when we were children. He always said the attic was full of treasures." I thought he was teasing, but... Her voice trailed off as Miss Marple ran her fingers along the trunk's edge, feeling for any hidden catch. With a soft click, a panel sprang open, revealing a small compartment. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and curling. Miss Marple lifted it carefully, her heart quickening. "Well, now," she said, her voice betraying a hint of excitement. "This might tell us something." Clara leaned closer, her fear forgotten in the thrill of discovery. "What is it? A diary?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple replied, opening the journal. The handwriting was cramped, the ink faded, but she could make out fragments of sentences. "The key lies where the shadow falls. Treasure hidden, betrayed by kin." The words were cryptic, written in a code that seemed to shift with each line. Miss Marple's lips pursed as she deciphered a phrase. "The heart of the manor guards its truth." "It's about the curse," Clara whispered, her voice trembling with awe. "The treasure Margaret Blackthornne hid. Do you think it's real?" Miss Marple closed the journal, tucking it into her cardigan. "Real or not, someone went to great lengths to keep this hidden. That alone makes it worth investigating." Her mind was already racing, connecting the journal to the wet footprints, the missing brooch, and the scream. The pieces were scattered, but a pattern was forming, like a half-finished jigsaw puzzle. A sudden creak broke the silence, sharp and deliberate, from the far end of the attic. Clara gasped, clutching Miss Marple's arm. "There it is again." "That sound?" Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her senses honed by years of unravelling mysteries in quiet villages. "Stay close," she murmured, moving toward the sound. The candlelight flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and writhe as they neared a cluster of old portraits. Miss Marple noticed one canvas slightly askew, as if it had been disturbed. She reached out, her fingers brushing the frame, when a shadow darted across the wall swift. Human shape that vanished into the darkness, Clara stifled a cry, but Miss Marple's hand shot up, signalling silence. She listened, her ears straining for any hint of movement. The attic was still, but the air felt charged, like the moment before a storm. "Whoever it was, they're gone now," she said softly, though her mind was alert. Someone had been watching them, and that someone knew the attic's secrets. "Let's take this journal back to my room," Miss Marple said, her tone brisk. "We'll study it where it's safe." She guided Clara toward the stairs, her calm demeanor masking the thrill of the chase. The attic had given up one secret, but it held others, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover them all back in her room. With the door firmly locked, Miss Marple spread the journal on the small writing desk. Clara sat across from her, her eyes bright with excitement. "What does it mean, Miss Marple? The heart of the manor, could it be the treasure?" Miss Marple's fingers traced the coded words, her mind working through the possibilities. It might be little place in the manor, or it might be figurative, pointing to something or someone central to the family. Margaret Blackthornne was betrayed, it seems. That betrayal could be the key to the curse. Clara shivered. "Do you think someone's still after the treasure? That shadow, it wasn't my imagination, was it?" "No, my dear," Miss Marple said gently. "It was quite real. But don't let it frighten you. Whoever was up there didn't expect us to find that journal. We've rattled someone, and that's a good start." Clara managed a weak smile. "You make it sound like a game." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "In a way, it is. A game of wits, and I've played it many times before." She closed the journal, her mind already mapping out her next steps. The attic had given her a clue, but it had also raised questions. Who had been watching them? And why was the journal hidden in a locked trunk, yet left unguarded? As Clara left to join her mother for tea, Miss Marple sat back, her knitting needles resuming their steady rhythm. The journal lay on the desk, a silent challenge. She thought of her old friend Mrs. Bantry, who once said, "Jane, you have a knack for seeing what others miss." Miss Marple smiled to herself. The attic's shadows had revealed more than their watcher intended, and she was content, for now, with the progress made. But the game was far from over, and she would need to be watchful. Someone in Blackthornne Manor was playing a dangerous hand, and Miss Marple was determined to call their bluff. Chapter 5. The gardener's secret. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Blackthornne Manor, casting dappled patterns on the worn parquet floor of Miss Marple's guest room. She sat at a small mahogany desk, her knitting needles clicking softly as she reviewed her notes from the previous day. The attic's coded journal, with its tantalizing hints of a hidden treasure, had kept her awake late into the night. Yet it was the manor's living inhabitants, not its ghostly legends, that now occupied her thoughts. Each member of the household seemed to carry a shadow of secrets, and Miss Marple's sharp mind was already piecing together the threads of their motives. She tucked her notebook into her handbag and adjusted her hat, a practical yet elegant affair with a single feather. Today she resolved to explore the grounds, suspecting the manor's secrets extended beyond its stone walls. The gardener, Tom, had caught her attention during breakfast. Gruff man with soil-stained hands and a guarded demeanor that suggested he saw more than he let on. His fleeting glances at Henry, Eleanor's withdrawn son, had not escaped her notice. Stepping into the crisp morning air, Miss Marple followed a gravel path that wound through the manor's sprawling gardens. The grounds were a curious mix of neglect and care. Rose bushes bloomed vibrantly, yet ivy choked the stone benches, and the fountain's cherub statue tilted precariously as if weary of its own existence. The greenhouse, a glass structure glinting in the distance, beckoned her. Its panes were fogged with condensation, hinting at life thriving within, despite the manor's air of decay. As she approached, she spotted Tom kneeling beside a bed of herbs, his broad shoulders hunched over a trowel. His weathered cap shaded his eyes, but Miss Marple noted the tension in his posture, as if he were braced for an ambush. She paused, considering her approach. A direct question might make him clam up. Better to ease into conversation, as one might coax a shy cat from under a porch. "Good morning, Tom," she called, her voice warm but not overly familiar. "Your rosemary is thriving. My nephew's wife swears by it for her lamb roasts, though I suspect you've a knack for more than just cooking herbs." Tom looked up, his eyes narrowing briefly before softening into a grudging smile. "Morning, miss. Rosemary's hardy, don't need much coddling, unlike some around here." His tone carried a faint edge, and Miss Marple caught the glance he threw toward the manor. She knelt beside him, pretending to admire a sprig of thyme. "These gardens must hold many stories. I imagine you see a great deal, working out here all hours." Her tone was light, inviting confidence without demanding it. Tom grunted, digging his trowel into the earth with more force than necessary. "See plenty, say little, keeps me out of trouble." Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. "A wise policy. But trouble has a way of finding us, doesn't it? Especially in a place like Blackthornne Manor, with its whispers of curses and awe." Tom's hands stilled, and he met her gaze, his eyes sharp with appraisal. For a moment she thought he might retreat into silence, but then he wiped his brow and leaned back on his heels. "You're not like the others, poking about for ghosts. You're after something real, aren't you?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. "I find people far more interesting than phantoms. Take young Henry, for instance. He seems troubled, don't you think? Wandering the grounds at odd hours, perhaps." Tom's jaw tightened, and he glanced toward the greenhouse, its glass walls shimmering in the sunlight. "You've got a sharp eye, miss. I've seen him, sneaking into the greenhouse, late, at night, when he thinks no one's about. Not sure what he's after, but it ain't flowers." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained serene. The greenhouse, how curious. Perhaps he's taken up botany. Tom snorted, a rough sound that held no humor. "Botany, my foot. He's up to something, mark my words. Seen him arguing, too, with some fellow I didn't recognize. Talked about debts, low and heated like. Didn't catch much, but it weren't friendly. Debts," Miss Marple repeated softly, her mind racing. The manor's financial strain had been evident in Eleanor's pinched expression and the faded grandeur of the furnishings, Henry's secretive behavior, and now this hint of debts suggested a deeper tangle. "Did you see where this fellow went?" Tom shook his head. "Slipped off into the dark, toward the woods, didn't follow. Ain't my business to chase shadows, of course," Miss Marple said, rising and brushing dirt from her skirt. "You've been most helpful, Tom. I think I'll have a look at that greenhouse myself. A bit of fresh air does wonders for clearing the mind." Tom tipped his cap, his expression unreadable. "Mind your step, Miss. Some plants in there ain't as friendly as they look." Miss Marple made her way to the greenhouse, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel. The structure loomed larger. As she approached, its glass panels streaked with age, but still sturdy. She pushed open the door, and a wave of humid, earthy air enveloped her. Inside, the greenhouse was a jungle of green. Ferns spilled over pots, vines climbed trellises, and exotic blooms in vivid reds and purples perfumed the air. Yet there was an undercurrent of something less wholesomer, faint, acrid scent that didn't belong. She moved carefully, her eyes scanning the rows of plants. A workbench in the corner caught her attention, cluttered with gardening tools, vials, and a small notebook. She glanced over her shoulder, ensuring she was alone, then opened the notebook. It was filled with meticulous records of plant care, but one entry stood out, a list of rare plants, including Deuterostramonium jimsonweed, a plant known for its toxic properties. Beside it was a note in a hurried scrawl, extract complete, store securely. Miss Marple's brow furrowed. Jimsonweed was no casual garden addition. Its alkaloids could induce hallucinations or worse. She recalled the faint chemical smell in the library where the wet footprints had appeared. Could the two be connected? Her fingers brushed a small glass vial tucked behind a pot, its label reading D extract. She slipped it into her pocket, resolving to have it analyzed later. As she explored further, she noticed a patch of disturbed soil near the back of the greenhouse, partially hidden by a curtain of ivy. Kneeling, she brushed aside the leaves, revealing a small trapdoor, its edges caked with dirt. Her heart beat faster. A secret compartment in a greenhouse was unusual, to say the least. She tugged at the handle, but it was locked. Before she could investigate further, the door to the greenhouse creaked open. Miss Marple straightened, adopting an air of casual interest as Henry stepped inside. His face was pale, his eyes darting nervously. "Miss Marple, what are you doing?" "Here, oh, just admiring the flowers," she said brightly, gesturing to a cluster of orchids. "Such a marvelous collection." "Do you come here often, Henry?" His gaze flickered to the trapdoor, then back to her. "Not really, just checking on things. Mother likes the roses kept up." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her tone disarming. "Though I imagine it's hard to find time for gardening with so much on your mind. Tom mentioned seeing you here at night. Perhaps you're studying the plants." Henry's expression hardened, but he forced a smile. "Tom talks too much. I was just looking for something. Lost a cufflink." "A cufflink," Miss Marple repeated, her voice laced with gentle skepticism. "How unfortunate. Perhaps I could help you look. This greenhouse seems full of surprises." "No need," Henry said quickly, stepping toward the door. "I'll manage. Excuse me." He hurried out, leaving Miss Marple alone with the hum of insects and the weight of her discoveries. She returned to the trapdoor, but without a key. It remained a mystery. The vial in her pocket felt heavier now, its contents a potential clue to the Manor's darker secrets. Henry's nervousness, Tom's revelation about the argument, and the mysterious extract pointed to a web of deceit that extended beyond ghostly footprints and missing brooches. The Manor's financial troubles, hinted at by Eleanor's strained demeanor and now confirmed by Tom's eavesdropping, suggested a motive. Was Henry desperate enough to dabble in something as dangerous as poison? Miss Marple left the greenhouse, her mind buzzing with possibilities. She paused by a stone bench, taking a moment to absorb the tranquility of the garden, though her thoughts were anything but calm. The pieces were falling into place. The coded journals, mention of treasure, the stolen brooches, reappearance, and now this vial of extract. Someone was orchestrating events to unsettle the household, and Henry's late-night visits to the greenhouse suggested he was entangled in it, willingly or not. As she walked back to the manor, she spotted Clara in the distance, sketching by the fountain. The young woman's spirited nature and fierce loyalty to her family made her an unlikely suspect, but Miss Marple knew better than to dismiss anyone. Clara's love for the artist Julian might complicate matters, especially if Henry's debts involved him. She made a mental note to speak with Clara later, perhaps over tea, where confidences flowed more freely. For now, Miss Marple was content. The gardener's secret had opened a new path in her investigation, one that led from the greenhouse's hidden trapdoor to the heart of the manor's troubles. She would watch Henry closely, his every move a potential clue. The vial in her pocket was a tangible link to the mystery, and she intended to trace its origins. As she entered the manor, the faint scent of rosemary clung to her, a reminder of Tom's reluctant candor and the secrets still buried in Blackthornne soil. The day was far from over, and Miss Marple's quiet determination burned brighter than ever. She would unravel this tangle, one thread at a time, until the truth stood clear in the light. Chapter 6. The midnight visitor. The moon hung low over Blackthornne Manor, its pale light filtering through the heavy velvet drapes of Miss Marple's guest room. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and wax polish, and the silence of the night was broken only by the occasional creak of the manor's ancient timbers. Miss Marple sat in a high-backed chair by the window, her knitting needles idle in her lap, her sharp eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the glass. She had not retired to bed, as the rest of the household believed. Instead, she waited, her instincts honed by years of unraveling human secrets, sensing that the night held answers. The events of the past days had woven a tangled web. The scream that had pierced the manor's stillness, the ghostly footprints leading from the locked library, the missing sapphire brooch, and the cryptic journal found in the attic pointed to a truth buried beneath layers of deception. Miss Marple's mind, ever agile, sifted through these clues, arranging them like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. The gardener Tom's revelation about Henry's nocturnal visits to the greenhouse had been particularly intriguing, hinting at debts and a mysterious stranger. Tonight, she resolved to catch a glimpse of whatever moved in the shadows of Blackthornne Manor. The clock in the hall struck midnight, its chimes reverberating through the corridors. Miss Marple's fingers tightened around her knitting, though her hands remained still. She had positioned herself strategically, the door to her room slightly ajar, offering a clear view of the staircase leading to the manor's lower levels. The household had retired hours ago, or so it seemed. Lady Eleanor's strained good-night, Clara's distracted farewell, and Henry's sullen silence had not escaped Miss Marple's notice. As for Mr. Grayson, the butler, his polished demeanour had begun to crack, his eyes darting too often toward the windows, as if expecting something or someone. A faint sound broke her reverie, the soft scrape of a boot against stone. It came from the direction of the servants' entrance, a narrow door tucked beneath the grand staircase. Miss Marple rose silently, her small frame moving with surprising agility. She slipped on her shawl, its muted grey blending with the shadows, and crept toward the door. Her heart beat steadily, not with fear but with the quiet thrill of pursuit. She had learned long ago that the truth often revealed itself in the dead of night, when pretenses were shed like old skin. The servants' entrance led to a stone passageway that connected the manor's main wing to the kitchens and cellars. Miss Marple descended the narrow steps, her slippers making no sound. The air grew cooler, tinged with the damp scent of earth and mildew. At the base of the stairs, she paused, her ears straining. There it was, Again a muffled thud, followed by the low murmur of voices. She edged forward, keeping close to the wall, her eyes adjusting to the dim light of a single lantern flickering at the end of the passage. The voices grew clearer as she approached the cellar door. One was unmistakably Mr. Grayson's, his usual clipped tones softened by urgency. The other was unfamiliar, low and gravelly, with an edge of impatience. Miss Marple crouched behind a stack of old wine crates, her breath shallow, her mind racing to catalogue every detail. The cellar door was ajar, and through the gap she glimpsed a figure's Grayson, his face pale and taut, and a cloaked figure whose features were obscured by a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. "You're late," Grayson hissed, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his waistcoat. "You know how risky this is." The cloaked figure snorted, a sound that carried both disdain and amusement. "Risky for you, perhaps. I'm not the one skulking about in my own house, playing servant to a crumbling dynasty. Did you bring it?" Grayson reached into his pocket and produced a small package, no larger than a cigarette case, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "It's all here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But this is the last time. I won't. You'll—" "Do as you're told," the stranger cut in, snatching the package, "unless you want your little secret aired to the world." Lady Eleanor might not take kindly to knowing her trusted butler's past. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Blackmail, she thought, her mind slotting this new piece into place. Grayson's nervous demeanour, his evasiveness when questioned about the brooch, now made sense. He was entangled in something far darker than she had initially suspected. She leaned closer, careful not to disturb the crates, straining to catch every word. The stranger unwrapped the package, revealing a small glass vial filled with a dark liquid that glinted in the lantern's glow. He held it up, inspecting it with a critical eye. "This better be the real thing," he muttered. "No more of your tricks." "It's exactly what you asked for," Grayson snapped, his composure fraying. "Now take it and go. If anyone sees you, relax, old man. The Manor's asleep, except for that nosy old bat you've got sniffing around." The stranger's voice took on a mocking tone. "What's her name?" "Marple. She's trouble, Grayson. You'd best keep her in check." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, but she remained still, her mind racing. The stranger knew of her presence, which meant her inquiries had not gone unnoticed. She filed this away, her thoughts already turning to how she might turn this to her advantage. Grayson's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "She's just a harmless old woman. She'll leave soon enough." The stranger laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent a shiver through the damp air. "Harmless? You're dumber than I thought. Keep an eye on her, or you'll regret it." The exchange ended abruptly as the stranger pocketed the vial and turned toward the cellar's outer door, which led to the garden. Miss Marple realized she had moments to act. She couldn't follow without risking discovery, but she needed something tangible, a clue to tie this encounter to the larger puzzle. As the stranger pushed open the door, a gust of night air swept through the cellar, fluttering a scrap of paper from his cloak to the floor. He didn't notice his footsteps already fading into the darkness. Grayson lingered, his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of exhaustion and fear. He muttered something to himself, too low for Miss Marple to hear, then extinguished the lantern and retreated toward the main house. Miss Marple waited until his footsteps faded before emerging from her hiding place. Her knees protested as she crouched to retrieve the scrap of paper, but her excitement outweighed the discomfort. The paper was a torn receipt, its edges frayed but legible. It bore the name of a London chemist, Harrington and Sons, apothecary. 47 Chancery Lane, enlisted a purchase. Extract of belladonna, 10 milliliters. Miss Marple's brow furrowed. Belladonna, or deadly nightshade, was a potent poison in the wrong hands, though it had medicinal uses in minute doses. She tucked the receipt into her sleeve, her mind already tracing connections to the mysterious liquid in the greenhouse and the faint chemical smell she'd noted in the library. She made her way back to her room, moving with the same silent precision. The manor was quiet now, the night undisturbed, but her thoughts were anything but calm. The receipt was a breakthrough, a tangible link to the conspiracy unfolding within Blackthornne Manor. Grayson's involvement was clear, but the stranger's identity and purpose remained elusive. Was he the unknown man Tom had overheard arguing with Henry? And what was the vial's purpose? Blackmail, sabotage, or something more sinister? Settling back into her chair, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the rhythmic click of the needles a counterpoint to her racing thoughts. She recalled a similar case in St. Mary Mead, where a seemingly innocuous chemist's receipt had unraveled a scheme involving poisoned cough syrup. People are so predictable, she murmured to herself, a faint smile tugging at her lips. They think they're clever, but they always leave a trail. Her mind turned to Grayson. His polished exterior had masked a man under pressure, his loyalty to Lady Eleanor compromised by some hidden shame. The stranger's threat suggested a past Grayson was desperate to keep buried. Miss Marple considered confronting him directly, but dismissed the idea. He was too guarded, too likely to clam up or flee. No, she would need to be subtler, perhaps using Clara's trust or Tom's observations to draw him out. The stranger, though, was the key. His mocking tone and familiarity with the manor suggested he was no outsider. A disgruntled former servant, perhaps, a relative with a grudge. The mention of her own name had been a warning, but also a gift. It confirmed she was getting close. Let them underestimate me, she thought, her eyes gleaming. It's always their first mistake. She glanced at the receipt again, memorizing the chemist's address. A trip to London was impractical, but a telegram to her old friend Inspector Craddock might yield answers. He had contacts in the city and a knack for uncovering shady dealings. For now, though, she would keep the receipt hidden, a card to play at the right moment. The night stretched on, but Miss Marple felt no fatigue. Her mind buzzed with possibilities, each clue a thread in the tapestry of Blackthornne Manor's secrets. The ghostly footprints, the missing brooch, the coded journal, and now this clandestine meeting, all pointed to a scheme rooted in greed, fear, or both. She thought of the family, Eleanor's quiet desperation, Henry's furtive glances, Clara's impulsive loyalty. Each had a role to play, willingly or not. As dawn approached, painting the sky with streaks of grey, Miss Marple set her knitting aside and rose to prepare for the day. She was satisfied with her night's work, the receipt. A solid step forward. The stranger might have escaped, but he had left her a gift, and she intended to use it. The game was afoot, and Miss Marple, with her unassuming air and razor-sharp mind, was ready to play. The manor stirred to life around her, unaware of the old woman who held its secrets in her hands. She smiled, content in the knowledge that the truth, like her knitting, would come together stitch by stitch. Chapter 7. The locked room, riddled the morning sun, barely pierced the heavy drapes of Blackthornne Manor, casting long, jagged shadows across the oak-panelled dining room where Miss Marple sat, her teacup poised mid-air. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and the faint Thames of yesterday's unease. The household was abuzz, though not with the usual hum of breakfast chatter. A guest, Mr. Pembroke, portly, jovial antiques dealer from London who had arrived unannounced 2 days prior, was found unconscious in his locked guest room at dawn, discovered only when Clara, in a fit of early morning restlessness, had knocked and received no reply. The door, bolted from within, had required the gardener Tom's brute strength to break open, revealing Pembroke sprawled across the rug, his face pale, his breathing shallow but steady. Miss Marple's sharp eyes darted from face to face as the family gathered, their expressions a mix of concern and suspicion. Lady Eleanor, her silver hair impeccably pinned, wrung her hands, her voice trembling as she recounted the discovery. He was just lying there, as if asleep, but unnaturally so. The doctor's with him now, but oh Jane, what could have caused this? Henry, Eleanor's son, leaned against the mantelpiece, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on the floor. Clara, pacing near the window, chewed her lip, her fiery spirit dimmed by worry. Mr. Grayson, the butler, stood rigidly by the door, his face a mask of professional calm, though Miss Marple noted the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth. The household staff, hovering at the edges, whispered among themselves, their eyes flitting nervously toward the staircase. Miss Marple set her teacup down with a delicate clink, her mind already turning over the details. A locked room, an unconscious man, and no apparent cause, she mused aloud, her voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. Curious, indeed. I should like to see the room, if I may. Eleanor nodded, her relief palpable. Of course, Jane, anything you need. The guest room, tucked at the end of the Manor's west wing, was a study in understated elegance. A 4-poster bed with crimson drapes, a walnut writing desk, and a single window overlooking the mist-shrouded gardens. The door, now splintered, at the lock from Tom's efforts, hung slightly ajar. Dr. Harrow, the local physician, was just emerging, his brow furrowed as he adjusted his spectacles. Miss Marple he greeted, his voice low. Mr. Pembroke is stable, thank goodness. He's awake now, though groggy. Claims he remembers nothing after retiring last night. No signs of injury, no bruises, no cuts. His pulse is steady, but I confess I'm baffled. It's as if he simply stopped. Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. An intriguing choice of words. Doctor, may I examine the room? Dr. Harrow stepped aside, and Miss Marple entered, her small, bird-like frame moving with purpose. The room was undisturbed, save for the rug where Pembroke had fallen, its fringe slightly askew. The bed was neatly made, the pillows untouched, suggesting Pembroke hadn't slept. A glass of water sat on the bedside table, half empty, its surface undisturbed. The window was latched, the curtains drawn tight. But as Miss Marple's eyes swept the room, a faint acrid scent caught her attention. A chemical temps, sharp and fleeting, like the ghost of a laboratory. She knelt by the rug, her fingers brushing the fibres. No dust disturbed here, she murmured, yet the air feels wrong. Rising, she moved to the fireplace, its hearth cold and unused. Her gaze settled on a small, square vent, high on the wall above the mantel, barely noticeable behind a faded tapestry. She reached up, her fingers tracing the vent's edges, and felt a faint draught. Curious, she said softly, her mind racing. Clara, who had followed her, hovered anxiously. What is it, Miss Marple? Do you think someone attacked him? Miss Marple turned, her eyes twinkling with that familiar spark of discovery. Not attacked, my dear, not in the usual sense, but I suspect Mr. Pembroke's condition was no accident. Tell me, Clara, does this room share ventilation with others in the manor? Clara frowned, her auburn curls bouncing as she shook her head. I'm not sure. The manor's old, there are vents and passages everywhere. Grayson would know. He's been here forever. Indeed, Miss Marple said, filing the butler's name away. And the glass of water, did anyone touch it? No, Clara replied. We left everything as it was. Miss Marple nodded, her attention returning to the vent. She tapped it lightly, listening to the hollow echo. A delivery system. Perhaps, she mused. But for what? The chemical scent lingered in her memory, and she recalled the torn receipt she'd found in the cellar the previous night, marked with the stamp of a London chemist. Could they be connected? She stepped back, surveying the room once more. The locked door, the latched window, the undisturbed furnishings, it was a puzzle, and Miss Marple loved nothing more than a puzzle. I shall need to speak with Mr. Pembroke, she said, and perhaps Mr. Grayson. There's more here than meets the eye. By midday, Mr. Pembroke was propped up in a chair in the drawing-room, a blanket draped over his knees, his round face still pale but his eyes alert. He was a man of middle age, with a penchant for loud waistcoats and an easy laugh, though today his joviality was muted. Miss Marple sat opposite him, her knitting needles clicking softly, a deliberate rhythm that seemed to soothe the room's tension. I swear, Miss Marple, Pembroke said, his voice hoarse, I haven't the foggiest. What happened? I retired around 10, felt perfectly fine. Next thing I know, I'm on the floor and Clara's shaking me awake. It's dashed queer. Did you notice anything unusual before you retired? Miss Marple asked, her eyes never leaving her knitting. A sound, a smell, perhaps. Pembroke rubbed his temples, frowning. Now you mention it, there was a faint odour like metal or medicine. I thought it was just the mustiness of these old rooms, but I locked the door myself, and the window was shut tight. No one could have gotten in. Miss Marple's needles paused. No one needed to get in, Mr. Pembroke. Tell me, have you any enemies or debts, perhaps, that might follow you here? Pembroke's eyes widened, then darted away. Enemies? Good heavens, no. I'm just an antiques dealer, poking about for rare finds, though he hesitated, his fingers twisting the blanket. I did have a disagreement in London with a fellow collector. He claimed I outbid him unfairly for a set of Georgian silver, but that's hardly cause for whatever this was. Miss Marple nodded, her expression unreadable. And this collector, did he know you were coming to Blackthornne Manor? Pembroke shrugged. I might have mentioned it at the auction house. Word gets around. Satisfied for now, Miss Marple thanked him and rose, her mind turning to the vent and the chemist's receipt. As she left the drawing-room, she caught sight of Mr. Grayson polishing a silver tray in the hall. His movements precise, but his eyes flickering toward her. She smiled pleasantly, noting the slight stiffening of his posture. Mr. Grayson, she called softly, a word, if you please. The butler set the tray down, his face a study in neutrality. Of course, Miss Marple, I understand you're familiar with the manor's intricacies, she began, her tone conversational. The ventilation system, for instance, does it connect the rooms? Grayson's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. It's an old system, madam, installed a century ago. The vents do connect certain rooms, but they're narrow. Barely enough for air. Why do you ask? Oh, Just a passing thought, Miss Marple said airily, though her gaze was sharp. And the guest room where Mr. Pembroke was found, any peculiarities there? None that I'm aware of, Grayson replied, his voice smooth. The room's rarely used. I ensured it was aired out before Mr. Pembroke's arrival. Miss Marple nodded, her smile unwavering. You're most thorough, Mr. Grayson. One last thing, do you ever procure supplies from London chemists? For the household, perhaps. A flicker of unease crossed Grayson's face, gone as quickly as it appeared. Occasionally for cleaning. Solutions or the like. Nothing unusual. Thank you, Miss Marple said, dismissing him with a nod. As he retreated, she tucked her knitting into her bag, her mind alight with connections. The receipt, the chemical smell, the ventit was a delicate web, but one she was determined to untangle. That afternoon, Miss Marple returned to the guest room, armed with a small flashlight borrowed from Tom. The vent, high above the mantel, was her focus. She dragged a chair beneath it, climbing with surprising agility for a woman of her years, and peered inside. The beam of light revealed a narrow, dusty passage, its walls blackened with age, but there, caught on a jagged edge, was a tiny scrap of cloth grey, almost invisible against the soot dot. She retrieved it with a pair of tweezers, examining it closely. It was coarse, like a workman's glove, and carried the same chemical scent she'd detected earlier. Not a ghost, she murmured, but someone very much alive. Descending, she moved to the fireplace, her fingers probing the bricks. A faint click rewarded her efforts, and a small panel slid open, revealing a shallow recess. Inside was a vial, no larger than her thumb, containing a clear liquid. She held it to the light, noting a faint residue on the glass. Careless, she said softly, wrapping it in her handkerchief. Her next stop was the Manor's library, where she pored over a dusty volume on toxicology borrowed from Dr. Harrow. The chemical smell, she suspected, was no ordinary household. Cleaner, chloroform, perhaps, or something more exotic delivered through the vent to render Pembroke unconscious. But why? To scare him? To silence him? And how did it connect to the Manor's other mysteries? The footprints, the missing brooch, the coded journal. As evening fell, Miss Marple joined the family for dinner, her demeanour as serene as ever. The conversation was stilted, the air heavy with unspoken questions. Henry barely touched his food, his eyes darting to Grayson, who served with mechanical precision. Clara, meanwhile, kept glancing at Miss Marple, as if seeking reassurance. After dinner, Miss Marple lingered in the drawing room, her knitting resumed. Eleanor approached, her face drawn. "Jane, have you found anything? I can't bear this uncertainty." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "I've found a method, Lady Eleanor, but not yet the motive. Someone in this house, or perhaps beyond it, wished Mr. Pembroke harm, but not death. A warning, perhaps, or a means to an end." Eleanor paled. "But who and why?" "That," Miss Marple said, her eyes gleaming, "is what I intend to discover." That night, Miss Marple sat by her window, the Manor cloaked in silence. The vial, now hidden in her locked travelling case, was the key, she was certain. The receipt from the London chemist, the scrap of cloth, the vent they pointed to a calculated act, not a supernatural one. Grayson's evasiveness, Henry's debts, the mysterious visitor in the cellar were threads in the same tapestry. She thought of her village, St. Mary Mead, where human nature revealed itself in small, telling ways. A glance, a hesitation, a lie too smoothly told. Blackthornne Manor was no different, only grander in scale. Someone had used the manor's secret sifts. Its passengers stage a crime, banking on the curse to mask their intent as the clock struck midnight. A faint creak echoed from the hall. Miss Marple rose, her shawl draped over her shoulders, and opened her door a crack. A shadow moved at the far end of the corridor, too quick to identify. She smiled faintly, undeterred. The riddle of the locked room was solved in method, if not in purpose. The perpetrator, she knew, was close, perhaps closer than anyone suspected. Satisfied with her progress, she returned to her chair, her mind already plotting the next step. The chemist's receipt would lead her to London, she decided, and to the heart of this conspiracy. For now, she would watch and wait and let the manor's secrets reveal themselves. Chapter 8. Clara's confession. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Blackthornne Manor, casting long dappled shadows across the parlour where Miss Marple sat, her knitting needles clicking softly. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and wax polish, but there was an undercurrent of tension, like a storm gathering on the horizon. The events of the past days, the scream in the night, the ghostly footprints, the vanishing heirloom, and the unsettling discovery in the attic had woven a tapestry of mystery that Miss Marple was determined to unravel. Her sharp eyes, hidden behind their usual gentle demeanour, scanned the room, noting every detail, the slightly askew portrait of a stern Blackthornne ancestor, the faint scuff on the floor near the hearth, and the way Clara Blackthorne's hands fidgeted with the hem of her dress as she sat across from her. Clara, with her auburn hair loosely pinned and her green eyes darting nervously, seemed on the verge of speaking several times, but held back, as if wrestling with an invisible burden. Miss Marple, ever patient, let the silence stretch, her needles moving rhythmically, a quiet invitation for Clara to unburden herself. The young woman had been a puzzle from the start, spirited and quick-witted, yet shadowed by a restlessness that suggested secrets. Miss Marple had seen it before in young women of Clara's age, the clash between duty to family and the pull of something or someone else. Finally, Clara stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice low but urgent, "I must speak with you. Alone. There's something I haven't told anyone, not even Mother." Miss Marple's needles paused, and she looked up with a kind but penetrating gaze. "My dear, I've found that secrets have a way of weighing heavier the longer they're kept. Why don't you tell me what's troubling you?" Clara hesitated, then sank back into her chair, her hands clasped tightly. "It's about Julian Ward, the artist in the village. I am in love with him." The words tumbled out, half defiant, half relieved, as if they'd been locked away too long. "Mother disapproves, of course. She thinks he's beneath us, a penniless painter with no prospects. But he's not what she thinks, Miss Marple. He's kind and talented, and he sees the world differently. He sees me." Miss Marple nodded, her expression softening. "Love has a way of complicating things, doesn't it? But I sense there's more to this than your mother's disapproval." Clara's eyes widened, as if Miss Marple had peered straight into her soul. "There is," she admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm afraid for Julian, I think. I think Henry's debts have something to do with him. I overheard Henry talking to someone in the garden 2 nights ago, someone I didn't recognize. They mentioned Julian's name, and something about settling accounts. I don't know what it means, but I'm terrified Henry's dragged him into something dangerous." Miss Marple's mind sharpened at this revelation, slotting it into the puzzle she'd been assembling. Henry's secretive behavior, the mysterious figure in the cellar. The chemist's recital pointed to a web of intrigue that seemed to tighten around the Blackthornne family. But Clara's confession opened a new thread, one that tugged at the heart as much as the mind. "You've done well to tell me this, Clara," she said gently. "Do you think Julian might know more than he's letting on?" Clara shook her head, her eyes fierce. "He's honest, Miss Marple. If he's involved, it's not by choice. I want to help you find out what's happening, whatever it takes to keep him safe." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her decision made. "Then let's pay Mr. Ward a visit. An artist's studio can reveal as much about a man as his words. And perhaps we'll find a clue to untangle this knot." The village of Blackthornne Hollow lay a mile from the manor, a cluster of stone cottages nestled along a winding lane, their chimneys puffing lazily into the crisp autumn air. Miss Marple and Clara walked side by side, the older woman's sensible shoes crunching on the gravel, her umbrella tucked under her arm as a precaution against the unpredictable sky. Clara, wrapped in a woolen shawl, seemed lighter now, as if sharing her secret had lifted a weight, though her eyes still scanned the hedgerows nervously. Julian Ward's studio was a converted barn at the edge of the village, its weathered timbers painted with streaks of ochre and blue, as if the artist couldn't resist splashing his creativity onto the world around him. The door stood ajar, and from within came the faint strains of a gramophone playing a melancholy waltz. Miss Marple knocked lightly, and a moment later a young man appeared. His dark hair tousled and his shirt sleeves rolled up, smudged with charcoal. "Clara." Julian's face lit up, then faltered as he noticed Miss Marple. "And Miss Marple, isn't it? I've heard you're quite the detective." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling. "Only when there's a puzzle to solve, Mr. Ward. May we come in?" The studio was a chaos of colour and clutter, canvases stacked against walls, easels laden with half-finished paintings, and shelves brimming with jars of pigment and brushes. Sketches were pinned haphazardly to a corkboard, and Miss Marple's gaze was drawn immediately to a series of drawings depicting Blackthornne Manor, just its grand facade, but its hidden corners, a staircase spiralling into shadow, a stone archway half covered in ivy, a narrow passage that looked suspiciously like a secret tunnel. Her pulse quickened. These were no mere artistic studies. They were maps of the manor's secrets. "These are remarkable," Miss Marple said, gesturing to the sketches. "You've captured the manor's less obvious features. Have you spent much time exploring its nooks and crannies?" Julian's smile was tight, and he rubbed the back of his neck. "I've always been fascinated by old houses. Clara's told me stories about the manor's history, and I suppose I got carried away imagining its secrets." Clara stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "Julian, if you know something about Henry or the manor, you must tell us. I'm worried for you." Julian's eyes flicked to Clara, then to Miss Marple, and for a moment he seemed to weigh his options. Then he sighed, his shoulders sagging. "All right, I didn't want to drag you into this, Clara, but Henry came to me a month ago. He was desperate, said he owed money to some people in London, dangerous people. He asked me to help him find something in the manor, something valuable he thought was hidden there. He said it was tied to the old curse." Miss Marple's mind raced. The journal from the attic, with its coded hints of a hidden treasure, now seemed more significant than ever. "Did he say what this something was?" she asked. Julian shook his head. "Only that it was worth enough to clear his debts and more. He showed me a map-hold, crumbling with strange symbols. I sketched some of the passages he described, thinking I could help without getting too involved. But then, he hesitated, glancing at Clara. Then I saw someone watching the studio last week. A man, cloaked, standing in the trees. I think he was one of Henry's creditors. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you caught in the middle, Julian said, his voice breaking. I thought if I kept quiet, it would pass. But now, with Miss Marple here, I can't stay silent. I'm scared, Clara. Not just for me, but for you and your family. Miss Marple's expression remained calm, but her mind was a whirlwind of connections, the cloaked figure in the cellar, the receipt from the London chemist, and now a mysterious watcher in the woods, all threads leading to Henry's debts and the Manor's hidden treasure. She stepped closer to the sketches, her eyes narrowing at a drawing of a passage that matched the one she'd found behind the library's hidden panel. Mr. Ward, she said, these sketches are more than artistic fancy. They're a guide. Did Henry mention where he got this map? Julian nodded slowly. He said it came from Grayson, the butler. He claimed Grayson knew more about the Manor's secrets than anyone. Miss Marple's lips pressed into a thin line. Grayson, with his evasive answers and nervous demeanor, was becoming a central figure in this mystery. But there was another piece to consider. Clara's loyalty to Julian and Julian's own role in this affair. Was he truly an innocent bystander, or was he more deeply entangled? She would need to tread carefully. Thank you, Mr. Ward, she said, her tone warm but firm. You've been most helpful. Clara, perhaps you'd like to stay and speak with Julian privately. I'll return to the Manor and have a word with Mr. Grayson. Clara's eyes shone with gratitude. Thank you, Miss Marple. I'll do whatever you need to help. As Miss Marple stepped out into the cool air, her umbrella tapping the ground, she felt a quiet satisfaction. Clara's confession had opened a door, and Julian's revelations had shown a light into the shadows. The Manor's secrets were unraveling, thread by thread, and she sensed the truth was closer than ever. But there was danger to a cloaked figure, a syndicate in London, a butler with too many secrets. She would need all her wits to navigate the path ahead. Back at Blackthornne Manor, the afternoon had grown heavy with clouds, and the Manor's stone walls seemed to loom larger, as if guarding their secrets more fiercely. Miss Marple found Grayson in the dining room, polishing silver with a precision that bordered on obsession. His hands paused as she entered, and his eyes flicked up, guarded. Mr. Grayson, she said pleasantly, settling into a chair. I've been admiring the Manor's architecture. So many hidden corners. You must know every inch of this place. Grayson's smile was thin. Years of service, Miss Marple. One learns the lay of the land. Indeed, she said, her tone light, but her eyes sharp. I understand you've shared some of that knowledge with Master Henry. Old maps, perhaps. Stories of hidden treasures. Grayson's hand twitched, and a spoon clattered to the table. I don't know what you mean, ma'am, he said, but his voice was too quick. Too tight. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soft but unyielding. Come now, Mr. Grayson. A young man in debt, a map from the butler, a cloaked figure skulking about. It's all rather intriguing, don't you think? I'm only trying to help this family, and I believe you know more than you're saying. For a moment Grayson's facade held, his face a mask of polite indifference. Then, slowly, he set down the cloth, his shoulders slumping. You're a sharp one, Miss Marple, he said quietly. I didn't want trouble. I only gave Henry the map because he begged me, said it was his only way out. I didn't know it would bring them. Miss Marple prompted, her heart quickening. Grayson's eyes darted to the door, as if expecting someone to burst through. Men from London, not the sort you cross. They've been pressuring Henry, and now they're watching the manor. I don't know their names, but they're after something in this house, something worth more than all our lives. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The syndicate Julian had hinted at, the cloaked figure, the chemist's receipt, was all converging. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson," she said, rising. "You've done the right thing by telling me. Now, let's keep this between us for now, shall we?" As she left the dining room, the weight of the mystery pressed heavier, but so did her resolve. Clara's alliance with Julian, and now Grayson's reluctant confession, had given her new pieces to the puzzle. The manor's curse was no supernatural force, but a human one: greed, desperation, and secrets buried deep. She felt a quiet satisfaction, sensing the truth was within reach, but she knew the danger was closer to. The next move would require all her cunning, and she was ready. The chapter closed with Miss Marple in her room. Her knitting resumed, but her mind far from idle. The manor's shadows were growing longer, but so was her list of clues. Clara's honesty, Julian's sketches, Grayson's fear, they were all threads in the same tapestry. And somewhere, in the heart of Blackthornne Manor, lay the key to unravelling it all. Chapter 9. The curse's origin. The morning mist clung to Blackthornne Manor like a shroud, curling around its ivy-clad walls and pooling in the hollows of the gardens. Miss Marple, ever an early riser, sat at the small writing desk in her guest room, the coded journal from the attic open before her. Its brittle pages, yellowed with age, whispered secrets she was determined to unravel. The flickering candlelight cast shadows that danced across the room, mimicking the unease that had settled over the manor since her arrival. Her nimble fingers traced the cryptic symbols in the journal, her mind piecing together the puzzle with the precision of a seasoned knitter untangling a knot. The journal belonged to Margaret Blackthornne, an ancestor whose name had surfaced repeatedly in hushed village tales of betrayal and curses. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp despite her years, scanned the faded ink. The code was a simple substitution cipher, one she'd encountered in her youth, during a particularly intriguing case involving a vicar's missing hymenal. With a pencil, she jotted down her deciphered notes, revealing a narrative that sent a thrill through her. Margaret had written of a fortune her family's, wealth hidden to protect it from greedy hands that would tear the heart from Blackthornne. The final entry mentioned a key concealed in the chapel, a clue that promised to unlock the mystery of the manor's curse. Miss Marple closed the journal, her lips pursed in thought. The chapel, a crumbling stone structure at the edge of the estate, had caught her eye during her first walk through the grounds. Its stained glass windows, depicting sombre saints, seemed to guard secrets of their own. She decided to investigate at once, before the household stirred. Slipping on her sensible shoes and a woolen shawl, she moved quietly through the manor's dim corridors, her footsteps muffled by the thick rugs. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and wax, and every creak of the floorboards seemed to carry a warning. Outside, the mist parted reluctantly as she approached the chapel, its iron-bound door ajar as if inviting her in. The interior was cool and dim, the only light filtering through the coloured glass, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the stone floor. Miss Marple's gaze swept over the pews, the altar, and the weathered effigies of long-dead Blackthornes. Her Attention settled on a carved stone embedded in the wall behind the altar. Its edges worn, but its inscription clear. In faith, seek the heart of Blackthornne. She ran her fingers over the words, feeling for irregularities. The stone was solid, immovable, but the phrase nagged at her. A heart, she mused, could be literal or metaphorical, a locket, a vault, or even a person. As she pondered, a faint creak echoed from the shadows near the chapel's rear. Miss Marple froze, her heart quickening not from fear but from the thrill of discovery. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the gloom. A flicker of movement caught her attention. A curtain near a side alcove swayed, though no breeze stirred the air. She approached, her steps deliberate, her hand resting lightly on the small silver cross she wore, a habit from her days in St. Mary Mead, when she'd faced down more than one village miscreant. "Who's there?" She called softly, her voice steady but laced with authority. No answer came, only the distant drip of water from a leaky roof. She parted the curtain, revealing a narrow alcove with a dusty prayer stool and a faded tapestry depicting a woman in a flowing gown, her hands clutching a locket. Miss Marple's breath caught. The locket matched the description in the journal, a silver oval engraved with a rose, Margaret's cherished keepsake. But the alcove was empty, the creak unexplained. Undeterred, she returned to the carved stone. The inscription's mention of heart tugged at her memory of the journal's cryptic phrases. Margaret had written of hiding her fortune where faith meets stone. Miss Marple knelt, inspecting the base of the altar. Her fingers brushed against a loose flagstone, its edges slightly raised. With a gentle tug, it lifted, revealing a shallow cavity. Inside lay a small, tarnished box, its lid etched with the same rose motif as the tapestry. Her heart quickened. This was no mere trinket, it was the key, or at least a step toward it. Before she could open the box, another creak sounded, sharper this time, from the chapel's entrance. Miss Marple slipped the box into her pocket and stood, smoothing her shawl as if nothing were amiss. A shadow loomed in the doorway, and for a moment she thought it might be Mr. Grayson, the butler whose secretive demeanour had raised her suspicions. But the figure stepped into the light, revealing Clara Blackthornne, her face pale and her eyes wide with urgency. "Miss Marple," Clara whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "I saw someone moving out here in the mist. I thought it was you at first, but then I heard you inside. I'm frightened." Miss Marple patted Clara's arm, her calm demeanour a balm to the young woman's nerves. "Now, my dear, no need to panic. Let's sit a moment and sort this out. Did you see who it was?" Clara shook her head, her auburn curls trembling. It was too foggy, but they were tall, wearing a cloak. They moved toward the woods, quick-like, as if they didn't want to be seen. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. A cloaked figure matched her own sighting of the midnight visitor in the cellar with Grayson. The pieces were aligning, but the puzzle was far from complete. "You've done well to tell me, Clara. Now, let's keep this between us. No need to alarm your mother or Henry just yet." Clara hesitated, then nodded. "I trust you, Miss Marple, but please, be careful. This place, it feels like it's watching us." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her eyes twinkling with resolve. "Oh, I'm quite accustomed to being watched, my dear. Now, let's return to the manor before we're missed." Back in her room, Miss Marple locked the door and opened the tarnished box. Inside was a folded parchment, brittle but intact, bearing Margaret's elegant script. It was no map or key, but a letter addressed to my dearest Eliza. The words painted a vivid picture. Margaret, betrayed by her brother over a disputed inheritance, had hidden her share of the family fortune to protect it from his greed. The letter spoke of a locket, the heart of Blackthornne, hidden where stone and faith embrace. Miss Marple's fingers tightened around the parchment. The chapel's carved stone and the locket in the tapestry were the clues she needed, but the locket itself remained elusive. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She tucked the letter and box into her knitting bag, then opened the door to find Lady Eleanor, her face drawn with worry. "Miss Marple, I must speak with you. It's about Grayson. I've just learned he's been sending letters to London, to some unsavoury people. I fear he's not what he seems." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, though her mind buzzed with this new thread. "Thank you, Eleanor. I'll look into it. Might I see those letters?" Eleanor shook her head. "He's clever, that one. Burns them after reading. But I saw the postmark London, near Cheapside. Not a place for honest dealings." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions about Grayson deepening. The butler's nervous glances, his late-night meeting, and now these letters pointed to a larger scheme. Perhaps he was the cloaked figure, orchestrating the Manor's disturbances to some end. But what of the curse? Was it mere superstition? Or was someone exploiting it to drive the Blackthornes from their home? As Eleanor left, Miss Marple settled back at her desk, the journal open once more. She reread Margaret's words, her mind weaving together the threads of betrayal, hidden treasure, and modern deceit. The chapel held the key perhaps literally, and she resolved to search it again. This time at dusk, when shadows might reveal what daylight concealed. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Miss Marple returned to the chapel, a small lantern in hand. The mist had cleared, replaced by a crisp chill that sharpened her senses. She moved silently, her eyes scanning for signs of the cloaked figure or the mysterious watcher. The chapel was silent, save for the faint rustle of leaves outside. She approached the tapestry, its threads glowing faintly in the lantern's light. With careful fingers, she lifted it, revealing a small recess in the wall. Her breath caught as she saw it a silver locket, its rose engraving gleaming. Before she could touch it, a low voice hissed from behind. "You're too curious for your own good, Miss Marple." She turned, her heart steady, to face a figure cloaked in black, their face obscured by a hood. The voice was unfamiliar, neither Grayson's nor Henry's, but its menace was clear. Miss Marple's hand tightened around her lantern, her mind racing through possibilities. "Curiosity is a virtue, my dear," she said calmly, "especially when it uncovers truth. Now, who might you be?" The figure hesitated, then stepped back, melting into the shadows as footsteps echoed outside. Miss Marple didn't pursue, knew better than to chase ghosts in the dark. Instead, she plucked the locket from the recess, its weight reassuring in her hand. She slipped it into her pocket and left the chapel, the night air cool against her face. Back in her room, she examined the locket under candlelight. It opened with a soft click, revealing a tiny, intricately drawn map of the Manor's grounds, with a mark near the greenhouse. Miss Marple smiled, her satisfaction tempered by caution. The curse's origin was Claire Margaret's fortune, hidden. To thwart betrayal had sparked greed that echoed through generations. But someone in the present was pulling strings, and the locket was only part of the answer. As she prepared for bed, the Manor's silence felt heavier, charged with secrets, yet to be uncovered. Miss Marple tucked the locket into her knitting bag, her mind already planning her next move. The greenhouse, the map, and the mysterious figure all pointed to a truth close at hand. She was content with her progressing other thread unraveled. Another step toward unmasking the Manor's shadows. But she remained wary, knowing the Watcher was still out there, waiting. Chapter 10. The Stranger's Warning. The morning mist clung to Blackthornne Manor like a shroud, curling around the ivy-clad walls and pooling in the hollows of the garden. Miss Marple sat by her bedroom window, her knitting needles clicking softly, though her sharp eyes were fixed on the distant chapel spire piercing the fog. The events of the past day's ghostly footprints, a missing heirloom, a coded journal, and a poisoned guest had woven a tapestry of intrigue, and she was determined to unravel its threads. The journal's mention of a key in the chapel had set her mind racing, but a new development was about to shift her focus. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, setting her knitting aside. Clara Blackthorne entered, her face pale but her eyes bright with urgency. "Miss Marple, there's a visitor at the gate. A woman asking for you specifically. She won't give her name, but she says it's urgent." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. "A woman, you say? How curious. Did she seem distressed?" "More secretive," Clara replied, twisting her hands. "She's waiting in the rose arbor. I told her you'd come." Miss Marple rose, smoothing her skirt. "Very well, Clara. Let's see what this mysterious visitor has to say. Lead the way." The rose arbor, tucked behind the Manor's west wing, was a tangle of crimson blooms and thorny vines, its seclusion making it an odd choice for a meeting. As Miss Marple approached, she saw a figure cloaked in a dark shawl, standing with her back to them, gazing at the mist-shrouded lawn. The woman turned at their approach, revealing a lined face framed by silver hair, her eyes sharp and wary, like those of a fox scenting danger. "Miss Marple?" the woman asked, her voice low and clipped. "I am she," Miss Marple replied, her tone polite but probing. "And you are?" The woman hesitated, glancing at Clara, who lingered a few steps behind. "Mrs. Lyle," she said finally, "I knew this manor long ago. I must speak with you alone." Clara frowned but nodded at Miss Marple's reassuring smile. "I'll wait by the gate," she said, retreating into the mist. Mrs. Lyle waited until Clara's footsteps faded before speaking. "You're stirring up trouble, Miss Marple, digging into things best left buried. For your own safety, you should leave Blackthornne Manor." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, though her mind was alight with curiosity. "My safety, Mrs. Lyle? That's a serious warning. Might I ask why you think I'm in danger?" Mrs. Lyle's lips tightened. "There are secrets here, old ones tied to pain and greed. You're close to something dangerous, and there are those who'd rather see you gone than let you uncover it." Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You seem to know a great deal about these secrets. Were you connected to the Blackthornne family?" Mrs. Lyle's gaze flickered, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might bolt. "I was Margaret Blackthorne's maid," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Long ago, before the curse took hold, I saw things I swore never to speak of." "Margaret Blackthorne," Miss Marple mused, recalling the journal's tale of the betrayed ancestor who hid a fortune. "The villagers thought you dead, Mrs. Lyle. Yet here you are, warning me. Why now?" Mrs. Lyle's hands clenched beneath her shawl. "Because you're too clever, Miss Marple. You're piecing it together, the journal, the treasure, the curse, but you don't know the whole of it. There's someone in this house who'd kill to keep it hidden." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face betrayed nothing. Someone in the house? That's a bold claim. Perhaps Mr. Grayson, the butler. He's been rather elusive. Mrs. Lyle's eyes widened, a flash of fear crossing her face. Grayson, she murmured. He's not what he seems. He was here back then, you know. Not as a butler, but as a young footman. He saw what happened to Margaret. He knows more than he lets on. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. Mrs. Lyle, if you know something about Grayson, you must tell me. Lives may depend on it. But Mrs. Lyle shook her head, stepping back. I've said too much already. Leave, Miss Marple, for your own sake. She turned, her shawl catching on a thorn as she hurried toward the gate, disappearing into the mist. Miss Marple stood still, her mind racing. Mrs. Lyle's sudden appearance and cryptic warning were no coincidence. The mention of Grayson as a young footman tied him directly to Margaret Blackthorne's era, a connection she hadn't suspected. She plucked the torn scrap of Mrs. Lyle's shawl from the rosebush, noting its fine weave expensive, not the fabric of a retired maid. Tucking it into her pocket, she resolved to confront Grayson, but discreetly. The Manor was a web of secrets, and she would need to tread carefully. Returning to the house, Miss Marple found Clara in the drawing-room, nervously twisting a handkerchief. Who was she? Clara asked. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. Someone with a past tied to this manor, Miss Marple replied, her tone light to ease Clara's worry. Tell me, Clara, has Mr. Grayson ever mentioned his time here before he became butler? Clara frowned. No, he's always been vague about his past. Mother says he's been with us for years, but, well, he's not exactly forthcoming, is he? Indeed not, Miss Marple said, smiling faintly. I think I'll have a chat with him. Where might I find him now? He's probably in the pantry, preparing for lunch, Clara said. Do be careful, Miss Marple. He's odd sometimes. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already mapping out her approach. The pantry was a small, windowless room off the kitchen, its shelves lined with gleaming silver and crystal. She found Grayson polishing a candelabra, his movements precise but his eyes distant, as if lost in thought. Good morning, Mr. Grayson, she said brightly, stepping inside. I hope I'm not interrupting. He started slightly, his hand pausing mid-polish. Miss Marple, he said, recovering quickly. Not at all, just tending to the silver. What can I do for you? She settled onto a stool, her demeanor casual, but her eyes sharp. I've been thinking about the Manor's history. It's such an old place, full of stories. You've been here a long time, haven't you? Perhaps even in the days of Margaret Blackthornne. Grayson's hand froze, and for a moment his face was a mask of tension. Margaret Blackthornne, he said, his voice carefully neutral. That was before my time, I'm afraid. Oh, come. Now, Miss Marple said, her tone teasing but pointed. A young footman, perhaps. The Manor must have been quite different then. Grayson set the candelabra down, his eyes narrowing. You've been listening to gossip, Miss Marple. I came here as butler, nothing more. The past is best left alone. Miss Marple tilted her head, unfazed. Is it? I've heard otherwise. A certain Mrs. Lyle, for instance, seems to think you know more about Margaret's time than you let on. The name hit like a spark. Grayson's face paled, and his fingers twitched toward his pocket before he caught himself. Mrs. Lyle, he said, his voice tight. She's dead. Everyone knows that. And yet, she was here this morning, Miss Marple said softly, watching his reaction. "Warning me to leave. She seemed quite convinced you're hiding something, Mr. Grayson." He stepped back, his composure cracking. "You're mistaken," he snapped. "I don't know any Mrs. Lyle, and I've nothing to hide. If you'll excuse me, I have work to do." He brushed past her, but Miss Marple caught a glimpse of something in his pocket, a glint of metal, perhaps a key or a locket. She made no move to stop him, letting him hurry out. Her heart beat faster, but her mind was clear. Grayson was rattled, and that was enough for now. Mrs. Lyle's warning had confirmed her suspicions. The butler was a key to the Manor's secrets, and she would need to watch him closely. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Miss Marple joined Eleanor and Clara for lunch, keeping the conversation light but noting Eleanor's strained smile and Clara's anxious glances toward the door. Henry was absent, reportedly, visiting the village, and Miss Marple wondered if he was meeting the mysterious man Tom the gardener had mentioned. The receipt for the London chemist still nagged at her, as did the chemical smell in Pembroke's room. Grayson's nervous exchange with the cloaked figure in the cellar suggested a conspiracy, and Mrs. Lyle's warning tied it to the past. That afternoon, Miss Marple slipped into the library, hoping to find more clues in the journal. The hidden panel she'd discovered earlier yielded another letter, this one from Margaret to an unnamed confidant. It spoke of betrayal by someone close, someone who coveted what was not theirs. The letter mentioned a key hidden in the chapel, echoing the journal's clue. Miss Marple's fingers traced the faded ink, her mind piecing together a theory. Margaret's fortune, the curse, and Grayson's secrets were all linked, and the chapel held the answer. As evening fell, Miss Marple decided to visit the chapel herself. The mist had thickened, cloaking the manor in an eerie silence. The chapel, a small stone building at the edge of the estate, was locked, but Miss Marple had borrowed a skeleton key from Clara, who'd found it in an old drawer. The door creaked open, revealing a dim interior lit by shafts of moonlight through stained glass windows. The air was cold, heavy with the scent of damp stone and wax. She moved to the altar, where the journal had mentioned an engraved stone. Her fingers brushed over a carved rose, its petals worn but distinct. Pressing it, she heard a faint click, but nothing moved. She knelt, examining the base, and found a small hollow, empty save for a scrap of cloth matching Mrs. Lyle's shawl. Her heart sank. Someone had been here recently, perhaps Grayson. A creak behind her made her freeze. She turned slowly, expecting to see the butler, but the chapel was empty. The sound came again, from above, and she glanced up to see a shadow flit across the rafters. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Who's there?" she called softly. No answer came, but the air felt heavier, as if someone were watching. Miss Marple stepped back, clutching the skeleton key. The shadow didn't move again, but she sensed she wasn't alone. Slipping the cloth scrap into her pocket, she left the chapel, locking the door behind her. The mist swallowed the manor. As she returned, her mind buzzing with questions. Back in her room, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. Mrs. Lyle's warning, Grayson's reaction, and the chapel's empty hollow pointed to a deeper conspiracy. Grayson's past as a footman placed him at the heart of Margaret's betrayal, and his nervousness suggested he was still guarding that secret. The cloth in the chapel confirmed Mrs. Lyle's presence, but her fear of Grayson hinted at a shared history. The key remained elusive, but Miss Marple was certain it was close. Perhaps the glint she'd seen in Grayson's pocket as the clock struck midnight. Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction. She had connected Grayson to the curse, and Mrs. Lyle's warning had given her a new angle. Tomorrow she would confront Grayson again, this time with more leverage. For now, she was content to let the Manor secrets simmer, knowing she was one step closer to unraveling them. Chapter 11. The Trap in the Tunnel. The air in Blackthornne Manor had grown heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Miss Marple, her knitting needles clicking softly in her lap, sat by the window of her guest room, her eyes not on the half-formed scarf but on the moonlit grounds below. The Manor's secrets were unraveling, thread by thread, and she felt the tug of a new clue pulling her toward the greenhouse. The gardener, Tom, had mentioned Henry's late-night visits there, and the discovery of a mysterious vial had set her mind racing. Now, with the house asleep save for the creaks of old wood, she sensed the moment was ripe for action. She slipped on her sturdy shoes, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and tucked a small flashlight into her pocket. The Manor's corridors were dim, the portraits on the walls seeming to watch her with silent judgment. She moved quietly, her steps light but purposeful, her mind alert to every shadow. The greenhouse lay at the edge of the estate, its glass panes glinting faintly under the moon. As she approached, the scent of damp earth and blooming night jasmine greeted her, mingling with something sharper, perhaps the chemical tang of that mysterious vial dot inside. The greenhouse was a jungle of shadows. Ferns and orchids loomed like silent sentinels, their leaves brushing against her as she navigated the narrow paths. The air was humid, thick with the breath of plants. Miss Marple's flashlight beam danced across the shelves, illuminating jars of soil, pruning shears, and a cluster of rare blooms Tom had proudly shown her. But her attention was drawn to the far corner, where a stone slab in the floor looked slightly askew, as if it had been moved recently. Kneeling, she ran her fingers along the slab's edge, feeling a faint groove. With a gentle push, it shifted, revealing a dark opening beneath. A tunnel. Her heart quickened, not with fear but with the thrill of discovery. The Manor was riddled with secrets, and this was no mere coincidence. The tunnel could connect to the chapel, where the journal had hinted at a key to the curse. She hesitated only a moment, then lowered herself into the narrow passage, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The tunnel was damp and cool, its walls rough-hewn stone that scraped against her shawl. The air smelled of moss and something metallic, like old coins left too long in a forgotten drawer. Her footsteps echoed softly, and she moved cautiously, aware that she was venturing into the unknown. The beam of her flashlight revealed cobwebs, and the occasional scurry of a startled creature, but no immediate danger. Still, her senses were sharp, attuned to the possibility of being followed. After what felt like an eternity but was likely only a few minutes, the tunnel widened into a small chamber. The walls here were smoother, carved with faint symbol spirals and crosses that suggested an older purpose, perhaps tied to the Manor's storied past. In the center of the chamber stood a stone pedestal, and atop it, glinting faintly in her flashlight's beam, was a locket. Oval, silver, and engraved with a delicate rose, it matched the description in the journal. This was the key. Miss Marple's fingers closed around the locket, its surface cool against her skin. She opened it carefully, revealing a tiny, folded piece of parchment inside. Unfurling it, she saw a crude map, its lines tracing the Manor's grounds and marking a spot in the chapel with an X. Her lips curved into a satisfied smile. The pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle was far from complete. A sudden noise, a sharp scuff of boots against stones, snapped her attention to the tunnel behind her. She clicked off her flashlight and pressed herself against the wall, her heart steady but her mind racing. The sound grew closer, deliberate, not the careless tread of someone lost. Someone knew she was here. Miss Marple, a voice called, low and tense. It was Henry Blackthornne, his tone a mix of surprise and something darker, fear perhaps, or guilt. She stepped into the open, her flashlight now back on, illuminating his pale face. His eyes were wide, his hair disheveled, and his hands were clenched at his sides. "Henry," she said calmly, her voice carrying the gentle authority of a schoolteacher addressing a wayward pupil. "I didn't expect to meet you in such a place at this hour." He swallowed hard, glancing at the locket in her hand. I saw you leave the house. I followed you." "You shouldn't be here, Miss Marple. It's not safe." "Not safe," she echoed, her tone light but probing. "And why is that, dear? Is there something in this tunnel or this locket that you're afraid I'll find?" Henry's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might bolt. But then his shoulders slumped, and he ran a hand through his hair, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I didn't want it to come to this. I swear I didn't, but I'm in too deep, and they won't let me go. They..." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her mind cataloguing every detail of his demeanor, the sweat on his brow, the way his fingers twitched, as if longing to grab the locket. "Who are they, Henry, and what hold do they have over you?" He hesitated, his gaze darting to the tunnel's exit as if expecting someone to emerge. "I owe money," he admitted at last, his voice raw. "More than I can ever repay. Gambling debts, mostly. I thought I could handle it, but they found me. They know about the manor, the treasure, the curse, everything. They told me to help them, or they'd ruin us. Mother, Clara, the estate. All of it." Miss Marple's expression softened, but her mind was as sharp as ever. "And this help," she said, holding up the locket, "involved leading them to this, I presume. The key to Margaret Blackthorne's fortune." Henry nodded, his face crumpling. "Grayson's part of it. He's been working with them, staging the hauntings to scare Mother into selling the manor. They think the treasure's hidden here, and they're desperate to get it. I didn't want to hurt anyone, Miss Marple. I swear I had nothing to do with Pembroke's attack." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Mr. Pembroke," she said, her tone neutral but her mind racing. "You know something about that, don't you?" Henry's eyes widened, and he took a step back, nearly tripping over a loose stone. I heard Grayson talking to someone in the cellar. They mentioned a chemical, something to knock Pembroke out. I didn't know why, but I think he saw something he shouldn't have. Maybe he got too close to the truth." Miss Marple, mind word, connecting the chemist's receipt she'd found to the faint smell in Pembroke's room. "And you didn't think to warn anyone?" she asked, her voice gentle but with a steel edge. "I was scared," Henry burst out, his voice echoing in the chamber. "They threatened to tell Mother about my debts, to ruin Clara's future. I thought if I just did what they asked, it would all go away." She studied him, her eyes kind but unyielding. "Fear makes fools of us all, Henry. But you're not a fool, not entirely. You've told me this much, which means you want to make things right. Help me now, and we can stop this before it goes further." Before he could respond, a low rumble echoed through the tunnel, followed by the unmistakable sound of shifting stone. The air grew thick with dust, and Miss Marple's flashlight beam caught the glint of falling debris. The tunnel was collapsing, or someone was trying to trap them, quickly," she said, grabbing Henry's arm and pulling him toward the chamber's exit. The locket was still clutched in her hand, the map safely tucked inside. They stumbled through the tunnel, the walls trembling around them. A loud crack split the air, and a section of the ceiling gave way, sending rocks tumbling just behind them. Henry's breath came in gasps, but Miss Marple remained calm, her mind focused on the path ahead. The tunnel sloped upward, and she could see a faint glow, greenhouse's entrance. They burst into the humid air, coughing and covered in dust. Just as the tunnel behind them sealed shut, warming with a groan of stone, Miss Marple leaned against a workbench, catching her breath. The locket was still in her hand, and she slipped it into her pocket, her mind already piecing together the next steps. Henry stood beside her, his face pale and streaked with dirt. "They tried to kill us," he whispered, his voice shaking. "They knew we were down there." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone steady. "Or perhaps it was a warning. Either way, we've stirred the hornet's nest, and we must be ready for what comes next." She looked at Henry, his guilt and fear plain on his face. "You've made mistakes, Henry, but you're not beyond redemption. Help me find Grayson's accomplices, and we'll put an end to this." He nodded, his eyes resolute despite the fear. "I will, I swear it." Miss Marple smiled faintly, satisfied with the locket and Henry's confession, but her mind was already racing ahead. The syndicate was closing in, and the treasure was within her grasp. She would need all her wits to stay one step ahead. They made their way back to the manor under the cover of darkness, the locket a heavy weight in her pocket. The night was far from over, and Blackthornne Manor's secrets were far from fully revealed. Chapter 12. Grayson's betrayal. The air in Blackthornne Manor had grown heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Miss Jane Marple sat in her guest room, her knitting needles clicking softly, though her mind was far from the scarf taking shape in her lap. The torn receipt from the London chemist lay on the table before her, its edges frayed but its implications sharp. The events of the past days, the ghostly footprints, the vanishing heirloom, the coded journal, and the unconscious Mr. Pembroke had woven a tapestry of deceit, and Miss Marple was determined to unravel its final threads. She glanced at the clock. It was nearing 11, the hour when shadows seemed to stir in the manor's corridors. Her conversation with Henry in the secret tunnel had confirmed her suspicions. The young man was entangled in a web of gambling debts, but his fear of Grayson, the butler, suggested a deeper conspiracy. Grayson's nervous demeanour during the midnight exchange in the cellar, coupled with Mrs. Lyle's cryptic warning, pointed to him as the linchpin. Tonight, Miss Marple resolved. She would confront him. She tucked the receipt into her pocket and rose, smoothing her tweed skirt. The manor was quiet, save for the distant creak of floorboards and the faint whistle of wind through ill-fitted windows. She stepped into the hallway, her sensible shoes silent on the polished wood, and made her way toward the servants' quarters. The air grew colder as she descended the narrow staircase, the scent of wax and damp stone filling her nostrils. Grayson's room was at the end of a dimly lit corridor, its door slightly ajar. A sliver of lamplight spilled onto the floor, and Miss Marple paused, listening. The low murmur of a voice reached her Grayson's, tense and clipped. She edged closer, her heart steady despite the thrill of discovery. Peering through the gap, she saw the butler hunched over a small desk, speaking into a telephone receiver. An anachronism in the manor's antique setting. "Yes, it's under control," Grayson was saying, his voice low but strained. "The old woman hasn't suspected a thing. The fire will take care of the rest. By tomorrow, the library will be ash, and with it, any evidence of the map." Miss Marple's lips tightened. A fire. The library, with its hidden panel and the journal's clues, was the heart of the Manor's secrets. She recalled the faint chemical smell in Mr. Pembroke's room and the vial in the greenhouse. Grayson was no mere butler. He was orchestrating a scheme to destroy evidence and, perhaps, the Manor itself. She needed to act swiftly. She knocked lightly on the door, adopting the mild, apologetic air that had disarmed so many before. "Mr. Grayson, might I have a word?" The butler started, nearly dropping the receiver. He slammed it down and turned, his face a mask of composure that failed to hide the flicker of panic in his eyes. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth but taut. "It's rather late. Is something amiss?" "Oh, nothing terribly amiss," she said, stepping into the room with a disarming smile. "I merely wished to discuss a small matter. You see, I found something curious, a receipt from a London chemist. It's rather odd, don't you think, for a butler to be purchasing chemicals?" Grayson's jaw tightened, but he forced a laugh. "Chemicals, likely for cleaning supplies, Miss Marple. The Manor requires meticulous care." "Indeed," she said, her eyes twinkling with that deceptive mildness. "But these chemicals, perhaps something like ether or a soporific, the sort that might render a man unconscious in a locked room, with only a faint smell lingering through a vent." The butler's face paled, and for a moment silence hung between them like a drawn bowstring. Then, with a suddenness that startled even Miss Marple, Grayson lunged for the desk drawer. She stepped back, her hand tightening on her umbrella. Weapon she'd wielded more than once in her long career of sleuthing. But Grayson didn't produce a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a small glass vial, its contents glinting amber in the lamplight. "You're too clever for your own good," he snarled, his polished demeanor crumbling. "You should have left well enough alone, Miss Marple." "On the contrary," she said calmly, her voice steady as she eyed the vial. "I find that leaving things alone rarely uncovers the truth. Tell me, Mr. Grayson, why stage these ghostly charades? The footprints, the missing brooch, the noises in the attic, what purpose do they serve?" Grayson hesitated, his fingers twitching around the vial. Then, as if the weight of his secrets had grown too heavy, he slumped into the chair. "It was never about ghosts," he said bitterly. "It was about the treasure. Margaret Blackthorne's fortune, hidden somewhere, in this cursed pile of stones. The syndicate in London, they've been after it for years. They promised me a cut if I could scare Lady Eleanor into selling the Manor." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "A syndicate? And you thought a few wet footprints and a missing brooch would convince her to abandon her home?" "It worked before," Grayson said, a hint of defiance in his voice. "Eleanor's superstitious. The curse, the stories, they've worn her down. The brooch was a distraction, meant to make her think the curse was real. The footprints were to keep the servants spooked, too frightened to question anything. And Pembroke, he was getting too close to the truth. He'd found the journal, started asking questions. I had to silence him. With poison through the ventilation system," Miss Marple said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Clever, but not clever enough. And the fire. You mentioned a fire." Grayson's eyes widened, realizing his slip. "You heard that. I hear." "Many things," she said, her voice gentle but unyielding. "A fire in the library would destroy the journal, the map, any trace of the treasure's location. But it would also destroy you, Mr. Grayson. A desperate act for a desperate man." He laughed, a harsh, broken sound, desperate. You don't know the half of it. The syndicate doesn't take kindly to failure. If I don't deliver, I'm a dead man. They've got eyes everywhere. Mrs. Lyle, that meddling hag, was one of their spies, watching me. She warned you, didn't she? She did, Miss Marple admitted, though I suspect her motives were not entirely altruistic. She knew Margaret Blackthornne, didn't she? A maid with secrets of her own. Grayson's shoulders sagged. Margaret trusted her, but Lyle betrayed her. She's been feeding information to the syndicate for decades, waiting for her chance at the fortune. When you started poking around, she panicked, thought you'd ruin everything. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The pieces were falling into place, but the danger was far from over. Where is the fire meant to start, Mr. Grayson? And when? He hesitated, then muttered, the library. Midnight. The chemicals are already there, hidden in the panel. A spark, and it'll go up like kindling. She glanced at the clock on the wall, -11-40. There was little time. You'll come with me, she said firmly. We'll stop this nonsense before anyone is hurt. Grayson shook his head, a wild look in his eyes. You don't understand. They'll kill me. And if you do nothing, you'll burn with the manor, she countered. Help me, and I'll see to it you're protected. Lady Eleanor is a forgiving woman, and I have friends in the constabulary. For a moment he wavered, the vial trembling in his hand. Then, with a resigned sigh, he set it down. All right, but you're signing my death warrant. They hurried through the manor, Miss Marple's brisk pace belying her age. The library was dark when they reached it, the heavy oak doors closed. She pushed them open, her umbrella raised like a scepter, and stepped inside. The air was thick with the acrid scent of chemicals, and a faint hiss came from the hidden panel in the wall. Quickly, she said, crossing to the panel. She'd seen it before, during her investigation of the ghostly footprints. With deft fingers, she pried it open, revealing a small canister rigged with a crude timer, a glass bulb filled with liquid, and a sparking mechanism. The timer's needle was ticking down, seconds from ignition. Grayson froze, his face ashen. It's too late, he whispered. Nonsense, Miss Marple snapped, her voice sharp with authority. She reached into her handbag, pulling out a small penny for tool she always carried for such unforeseen eventualities. With steady hands, she sliced through the wires connecting the timer to the canister, silencing the hiss. The bulb flickered and went still. She exhaled, stepping back. There, no fire tonight. But before Grayson could respond, a crackling roar erupted from the shelves behind them. Flames licked up the bookcases, faster than seemed possible, devouring the ancient tomes. Miss Marple's heart sank. The canister wasn't the only device Grayson had lied, or the syndicate had ensured a backup. Out, she shouted, grabbing Grayson's arm. The butler stumbled, coughing as smoke filled the room. The fire spread with unnatural speed, fueled by the chemicals. Miss Marple's mind raced. She needed to save Grayson, the evidence, and the manor itself. They staggered into the hallway, where shouts echoed from the upper floors. The household was waking, drawn by the smell of smoke. Clara appeared, her nightgown dishevelled, her eyes wide with fear. Miss Marple, what's happening? The library's burning, Miss Marple said, her voice calm despite the chaos. Fetch buckets, blankets, anything to fight the fire, and rouse the others. Clara nodded and ran off, calling for Henry and Lady Eleanor. Miss Marple turned to Grayson, who was coughing violently. You will help me put this out, she said, her tone brooking no argument, "and you will tell me the names of this syndicate?" Grayson nodded, his face streaked with soot. Together, they joined the frantic effort to save the library. Henry and Tom, the gardener, arrived with buckets of water from the kitchen, while Clara and Eleanor dragged heavy blankets to smother the flames. The fire was fierce, but the manor's stone walls contained it, preventing it from spreading to the rest of the house. Miss Marple worked tirelessly, directing the others with a clarity born of necessity. She noticed Grayson's hesitation, his eyes darting toward the door as if contemplating flight. "Stay where you are, Mr. Grayson," she said sharply. "Running now will only make things worse." By the time the flames were subdued, the library was a ruin, books charred, shelves blackened, the air thick with the stench of burnt paper. But the hidden panel, miraculously, had survived, its contents intact. Miss Marple retrieved the journal and the locket's map, tucking them into her handbag. She turned to Grayson, who stood slumped against the wall, his face a mask of defeat. "Now," she said, her voice soft but unyielding, "the names." He swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the shadows. "The syndicate, they're led by a man called Vincent Crowe. He's in London, runs a gambling den in Whitechapel. There's another, a woman, Isabel Drake. She's the brains, the one who planned this. They've got men everywhere, servants, villagers, even Mrs. Lyle." Miss Marple nodded, committing the names to memory. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson. You've done the right thing." As the household gathered, weary and shaken, Lady Eleanor approached, her face pale but resolute. "Miss Marple, you saved us. The library, the manor, it could have been lost." "Not quite saved yet," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling, despite the soot smudging her cheek. "But we're closer to the truth. Mr. Grayson has been most forthcoming." Grayson hung his head, avoiding Eleanor's gaze. "I'm sorry, my lady," he muttered. "I was desperate. They had me trapped." Eleanor's expression softened, though her voice was firm. "You'll answer for this, Grayson, but for now, you're safe." Miss Marple glanced at the charred library, her mind already turning to the next steps. The syndicate was still out there, and Vincent Crowe and Isabel Drake were names she wouldn't forget. The locket's map, now safely in her possession, was the key to Margaret Blackthorne's fortune and the final piece of the puzzle. As the household dispersed, Miss Marple stood alone in the hallway, the journal and map heavy in her handbag. She felt a quiet satisfaction, not unlike the feeling of completing a particularly tricky knitting pattern. Grayson's betrayal was exposed, the fire thwarted, and the manor preserved, but the syndicate loomed, a shadow yet to be dispelled. She smiled faintly, adjusting her hat. One step at a time, she murmured to herself, already planning her next move. Chapter 13. The treasure revealed that dawn broke over Blackthornne Manor with a hesitant glow, as though the sun itself were wary of the secrets still lingering within the estate's ancient walls. Miss Marple stood at her window, her sharp eyes tracing the mist that curled through the gardens like ghostly tendrils. The locket, now safely tucked in her cardigan pocket, felt heavy with promise. Its engraved map had burned itself into her memory, a series of cryptic lines and symbols pointing to a hidden vault in the chapel. Today, she would unravel the final thread of the manor's curse and secure the Blackthornne family's future. She adjusted her shawl, her mind already mapping the day's strategy. The household was stirring, and she could hear Clara's bright voice drifting from the breakfast room, mingling with Eleanor's softer tones. Henry's footsteps, heavier and more deliberate, echoed in the hall, betraying his unease. Miss Marple smiled faintly. The boy was trying to reform, but trust was a fragile thing, and she would keep her eye on him until the treasure was safely in hand. The chapel stood at the edge of the estate, a squat stone structure half swallowed by ivy, its stained glass windows dulled by years of neglect. Miss Marple had arranged for the family to join her there, sensing that the moment of revelation required witnesses not just for safety, but to cement the truth in their minds. The curse, as she had deduced, was no supernatural force but a web of greed and deception spun by human hands. Grayson's confession had exposed the syndicate's plot, but the treasure itself was the key to ending their schemes. As she crossed the dew-soaked lawn, Clara caught up with her, her auburn curls bouncing with nervous energy. "Miss Marple, do you really think it's there? The treasure, I mean. What if it's just another trick?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "My dear, treasures are often hidden in plain sight, obscured by doubt and distraction. The locket's map is precise, and I've learned to trust precision over superstition." Clara laughed, though her voice trembled. "I hope you're right. Mother's pinning everything on this. If it's real, we might finally be free of all this darkness." They reached the chapel, where Eleanor and Henry waited by the arched door. Eleanor's face was pale but composed, her hands clasped tightly over a velvet shawl. Henry stood apart, his gaze fixed on the ground, a faint flush of shame colouring his cheeks. Miss Marple noted his posture less defiant now, but still guarded. The air was thick with anticipation, and she felt a prickle of excitement. The game was nearly won. "Shall we?" Miss Marple said briskly, pushing open the heavy door. The chapel's interior was cool and dim, the air heavy with the scent of old stone and wax. Dust motes danced in the slanted light streaming through a cracked window, illuminating a worn altar and rows of pews. The map had indicated a spot beneath, the altar marked by a symbol resembling a crescent moon. Miss Marple's fingers brushed the locket in her pocket, confirming her memory. "Henry, would you help me move the altar cloth?" she asked, her tone light but firm. Henry hesitated, then stepped forward, his movements stiff. Together, they lifted the heavy embroidered fabric, revealing a stone slab etched with faint carvings. Clara gasped, pointing to a crescent moon inlaid with faded silver. "That's it, isn't it?" she whispered. Miss Marple nodded, her heart quickening. "Indeed. Now, let's see what lies beneath." Eleanor produced a small iron key, one she'd found among her late husband's effects, which Miss Marple had suggested might fit a hidden lock. The slab was heavy, but Henry's strength proved useful as he pried it loose with a crowbar borrowed from Tom's shed. A grinding sound echoed through the chapel as the stone shifted, revealing a narrow cavity. Inside was a rusted iron box, its surface engraved with the same crescent moon. "Oh, heavens," Eleanor breathed, her hand fluttering to her chest. "Is that?" "Let's find out," Miss Marple said, her voice steady despite the thrill coursing through her. She knelt, her knees protesting slightly, and examined the box. The lock was intricate but matched the key's design. With a gentle twist, the mechanism clicked and the lid creaked open. The sight within stole the breath from the room. Jewels, sapphires, emeralds, and rubies glinted in the dim light, nestled among stacks of yellowed bonds and deeds. A diamond necklace, its stones catching the light like frozen stars, lay atop a velvet pouch. Clara reached out instinctively, then drew back, her eyes wide. "It's real," she said, almost to herself. Margaret's fortune. Miss Marple lifted the necklace, noting its weight and craftsmanship. Your ancestor, Margaret Blackthornne, was a clever woman. She hid this to protect her family from those who would exploit it. The curse was a tale, to keep the greedy at bay, but greed, as always, found a way. Henry's voice was low, almost a growl. Grayson knew about this, didn't he? That's why he wanted the manor sold. Miss Marple nodded. Precisely. The syndicate he worked for believed the treasure was theirs for the taking. They used fear-ghostly footprints, strange noises to pressure your mother. But they underestimated the resilience of this family, and, perhaps, the curiosity of an old spinster. Eleanor's eyes glistened with tears. Miss Marple, how can we ever thank you? This changes everything. The debts, the repairs, we can save the manor. There's no need for thanks, Miss Marple said, rising with a small smile. The truth is its own reward. But we must be cautious. The syndicate may not give up so easily. As if on cue, a shadow flickered at the chapel's entrance. Miss Marple's hand tightened around the locket, her senses sharp. Clara, close the box, she said quietly. Henry, stand by the door. The figure stepped into the lighter. Tall man with sharp features and a tailored coat, his eyes glinting with a dangerous calm. Miss Marple recognized him instantly from a photograph in Grayson's room. Victor Crane, a known associate of the London syndicate. Miss Marple, he said, his voice smooth as oil. You've been busy. I'd hoped to avoid this, but it seems you've left me no choice. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. This is my home, Mr. Crane. You have no claim here. Crane's smile was cold. The treasure belongs to those with the wit to take it. Grayson was a fool, but I'm not. Hand over the box, and no one gets hurt. Miss Marple's mind raced, calculating. Crane was alone, but likely not unarmed. The chapel's layout offered little cover, but the tunnel she'd discovered earlier ran beneath the floor, its entrance hidden behind a loose pew. If she could distract him, Mr. Crane, she said, her tone mild, you seem a practical man. Surely you know this treasure is worthless without legal claim. The bonds are registered to the Blackthornne family. Stealing them would only bring you trouble. Crane's eyes narrowed. You're stalling. I don't need the bonds, just the jewels. Hand them over. Miss Marple gestured to Clara, who clutched the box tightly. Very well, she said. Feigning resignation, Clara set the box on the altar. Let's not risk harm. Clara hesitated, her eyes flicking to Miss Marple, who gave a subtle nod. As Clara placed the box down, Miss Marple moved closer to the pew, her fingers brushing the hidden latch. You must understand, Mr. Crane, she continued, this manor has seen enough trouble. Why add to it? Crane stepped forward, his hand reaching into his coat. Enough talk, he snapped. The box, now. In that moment, Miss Marple sprang the latch, and the pew slid aside with a groan, revealing the tunnel's entrance. Henry, now, she called. Henry lunged, tackling Crane as Clara grabbed the box and darted toward the tunnel, Eleanor close behind. Crane struggled, but Henry's weight pinned him, and Miss Marple swiftly retrieved a small vial from her. Pocket the same mysterious liquid she'd found in the greenhouse, now identified as a mild sedative. Forgive me, Mr. Crane, she said, splashing the liquid onto a handkerchief and pressing it to his face. He slumped, his eyes fluttering closed. Henry stared, wide-eyed. You carry sedatives? He asked, incredulous. Only when I suspect trouble, Miss Marple replied, dusting off her hands. Now, help me tie him up. We'll need the constable. The tunnel led them safely to the greenhouse, where Tom was waiting, alerted by a note Miss Marple had slipped him earlier. He gaped at the box in Clara's arms. Blimey, is that it? It is, Miss Marple said, her voice calm but triumphant. Tom, fetch the authorities. Mr. Crane will have some explaining to do. By midday, the manor was abuzz with activity. The constable, a stout man named Hargreaves, took Crane into custody, his expression one of begrudging respect as Miss Marple recounted the morning's events. The treasure was secured in a bank vault, with Eleanor overseeing the legal transfer. Of the bonds, Clara and Julian, now openly together, stood hand in hand, their faces alight with hope. Henry, though still subdued, had volunteered to catalogue the jewels, a small step toward redemption. As the sun dipped low, Miss Marple sat with Eleanor in the drawing room, a cup of tea warming her hands. You've given us a future, Eleanor, said softly. I thought the manor was lost, but you've shown us it's worth fighting for. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes crinkling. Families, like houses, have strong foundations, even when they're hidden. You just needed a little help uncovering them. Clara burst in, her cheeks flushed. Miss Marple, Julian's found a sketch in the chapel, a portrait of Margaret. It was behind the altar, hidden all this time. She looks, kind Miss Marple, smiled. I suspect she was. She protected her legacy, and now you'll carry it forward. That evening, the manor felt lighter, as though the curse had truly lifted. Miss Marple packed her small suitcase, her work here done. The treasure was safe, the syndicate's plans foiled, and the Blackthornes were united. As she stepped into the carriage, she glanced back at the manor, its windows glowing warmly against the dusk. Another puzzle solved, she murmured, settling back with a contented sigh. The road to St. Mary Mead stretched ahead, but she knew other mysteries awaited. For now, though, Blackthornne Manor was at peace, and that was enough. Chapter 14. The manor at peace. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over Blackthornne Manor, its rays filtering through the ancient oaks that lined the gravel drive. The once foreboding estate now seemed to breathe easier, its ivy-clad walls, softened by the light, as if relieved of a long-held burden. Inside, the air was alive with the clink of glasses and the murmur of voices, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that had gripped the manor just days before. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a high-backed chair near the drawing-room's grand fireplace, surveyed the scene with her characteristic quiet amusement. Her knitting needles clicked rhythmically, a soft counterpoint to the chatter as she observed the gathering that marked the resolution of the manor's mysteries. The drawing-room was festooned with garlands of late summer roses, their scent mingling with the faint smokiness of the fire. Lady Eleanor Blackthorne, resplendent in a deep emerald gown, moved among her guests with a newfound lightness, her smile genuine for the first time since Miss Marple's arrival. Clara, her auburn hair catching the firelight, laughed freely as she stood beside Julian, the young artist whose sketches had unwittingly aided Miss Marple's investigation. Henry, too, seemed transformed, his shoulders less hunched, his eyes brighter as he spoke earnestly with a local magistrate about his plans to settle his debts honourably. Even Mr. Grayson, the butler who had nearly lost everything to his own schemes, stood quietly in a corner, his face a mix of gratitude and humility after Miss Marple's timely rescue from the library fire. The gathering was a celebration, not just of the recovered treasure, Margaret Blackthorne's hidden fortune of jewels and bonds, now safely secured for the family's future, but of the Manor's liberation from the shadow of its supposed curse. Miss Marple had unravelled the tangled threads of deceit, from ghostly footprints to coded journals, revealing a plot driven by greed rather than supernatural malice. Yet, as she sipped her tea and listened to the lively conversations, she knew her work was not quite done. The villagers, many of whom were present, deserved to hear how the mystery had been solved, and Miss Marple relished the chance to lay out her deductions with her usual clarity and understated flair. "Miss Marple, you simply must tell us how you did it." Clara's voice cut through the hum of the room, her eyes sparkling with admiration. She crossed the floor, Julian trailing behind, his artist's hands stained faintly with charcoal. "We've all been whispering about it, but no one dares guess the whole story. Won't you share it?" The room fell quiet, heads turning toward the unassuming figure in the corner. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "Oh, my dear, it's hardly a tale of heroics," she began, her voice soft but carrying an authority that held the room. "It's simply a matter of observing people, how they behave, what they say, and, more importantly, what they don't say." She leaned forward slightly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "It began, of course, with the invitation from Lady Eleanor, a charming letter, but one that hinted at fear of something more tangible than village gossip about curses. When I arrived, the manor itself seemed to whisper secrets. The heavy drapes, the locked doors, the way everyone watched each other. That first night, when we heard the scream, I knew we were dealing with something staged, something meant to frighten. The guests leaned in, captivated. Eleanor, standing near the fireplace, nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around her. "Glass. I was so frightened," she admitted. "I thought the curse was real, that my family was doomed." Miss Marple smiled gently. "And that, Lady Eleanor, was precisely what someone wanted you to believe." The scream led me to the library, where I found those wet footprints, such a clever touch, leading from a locked room to the garden. But the footprints were too perfect, too deliberate. A ghost, I thought, would hardly leave such clear evidence. No, this was human work, designed to unsettle. She paused, letting her words settle. The library gave me my first real clue, a hidden panel with letters hinting at a family scandal. They spoke of Margaret Blackthorne, your ancestor who hid her fortune to protect it from greedy relatives. Those letters suggested a motive: someone wanted that fortune, and they were willing to exploit the old curse to get it. Clara's eyes widened. The sapphire brooch. When it went missing, I thought the curse had struck again. "Exactly," Miss Marple said, nodding. "The brooch's disappearance was no accident. It was tied to the legend, meant to stir fear and confusion. But when I found it in the garden, muddy but unharmed, I realized it was a distraction. Someone wanted us looking for ghosts, not thieves. The scuff marks near the fireplace confirmed that someone had been tampering with a secret compartment, perhaps hoping to find clues to the treasure." Henry shifted uncomfortably, and Miss Marple's gaze flickered toward him, kind but piercing. "Henry dear, you were under such strain. Your debts made you vulnerable, and someone used that against you. But you weren't the mastermind, were you?" Henry flushed, shaking his head. "No, Miss Marple, I was a fool, caught up in promises of quick money. I never meant for anyone to be hurt." "Of course not," Miss Marple said soothingly. "But someone else was pulling the strings." The noises in the attic led Clara and me to the coded journal, which pointed to a hidden treasure and a key in the chapel. That journal was a treasure map of sorts, but it also revealed the curse's true origin, Margaret's betrayal by her own kin, who coveted her wealth, the shadow we saw in the attic, another attempt to frighten us awayly, made me more determined. Julian, standing close to Clara, spoke up. My sketches of the Manor's passages, were they helpful, Miss Marple? I felt so useless, knowing Clara was in danger. They were invaluable, Miss Marple assured him. They showed me how someone could move unseen, staging their ghostly tricks. And then there was Tom, the gardener, who saw Henry sneaking into the greenhouse. That led me to the vial of liquid sedative, I suspected, linked to Mr. Pembroke's mysterious collapse in the locked room. The magistrate, a stout man with a bristling moustache, interjected. That locked room business, how? Did you know it was poisoning? Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. The faint chemical smell, the hidden vent, it pointed to a deliberate act. The receipt I found, torn from a London chemist, confirmed it. Someone had access to a substance that could render a man unconscious, perhaps to silence him. Mr. Pembroke, thankfully, recovered, but his memory loss suggested he knew something dangerous. Pembroke, sitting near the window, looked sheepish. I still can't recall much, but I'm grateful you saved me, Miss Marple. She waved a hand dismissively. It was simply a matter of connecting the dots. The midnight visitor I saw meeting Mr. Grayson in the cellar was another piece of the puzzle. Grayson's nervous demeanor, the exchanged package, it all pointed to a conspiracy. And when Mrs. Lyle, Margaret's old maid, warned me to leave, I knew Grayson was deeply involved. Her fear told me he had a past tied to the curse. Grayson, standing apart, cleared his throat. I owe you my life, Miss Marple. I was greedy, yes, but I never meant for it to go so far. Miss Marple's eyes softened. Greed makes fools of us all. Mr. Grayson, you staged the ghostly incidents to scare Lady Eleanor into selling the manor, hoping to claim the treasure for a London syndicate. But you underestimated the human spirit and, perhaps, my curiosity. A ripple of laughter broke the tension, and Miss Marple continued. The secret tunnel from the greenhouse to the chapel was the final clue. There, I found the locket, the key with a map to Margaret's vault. Henry's confession about his blackmail, and Grayson's about the syndicate, tied it all together. The fire in the library was a desperate act, but it only hastened the truth. She leaned back, her expression serene. The treasure jewels and bonds was exactly where the locket's map indicated, hidden in the chapel vault. It's now secure, ensuring the Blackthornne family's future. The curse was no more than a tailspin to manipulate, and with the truth revealed, the manor is at peace. The room erupted in applause, and Eleanor stepped forward, her eyes glistening. Miss Marple, we owe you everything. You've given us back our home, our hope. Miss Marple shook her head modestly. I only did what anyone might, given a few clues and a bit of patience. People are much the same everywhere, you know. Their fears, their secrets, they tell a story, if you listen. As the evening wore on, the guests mingled, their voices lighter, their laughter freer. Clara and Julian slipped onto the terrace, their silhouettes framed against the sunset as they spoke of their future. Henry, now resolute, discussed his plans to study agriculture, hoping to restore the manor's lands. Even Grayson, though subdued, was offered a chance to stay on, his skills valued despite his mistakes. Miss Marple, however, felt the familiar stir of restlessness. She stepped onto the terrace, the cool evening air brushing her cheeks. The manor's grounds stretched before her, No longer ominous but serene, the curse's shadow lifted. Yet her mind wandered to St. Mary Mead, to her little cottage and the quiet intrigues of village life. She thought of her friend, Dolly Bantry, who would no doubt demand every detail of this adventure over tea. A young girl, the magistrate's daughter, approached shyly, clutching a small bouquet of roses. "Miss Marple, these are for you. Thank you for making the manor safe." Miss Marple accepted the flowers, her smile warm. "Why, thank you, dear. But remember, safety comes from truth, and truth comes from watching and listening. You'd do well to practice both." The girl beamed, scampering back to her father, and Miss Marple turned her gaze to the horizon. The case was solved, the manor at peace, but she knew other mysteries awaited, perhaps in a quiet village or a bustling city. Human nature, after all, was her greatest puzzle, and she was far from done solving it. As she returned to the drawing room, the firelight casting dancing shadows, Miss Marple picked up her knitting once more. The needles resumed their steady rhythm, a quiet promise of adventures yet to come.